What if you've already lived this exact moment? Not yesterday, not metaphorically, but literally, this sentence, this breath, this glance at the screen, all of it happening again, exactly as before. Not in a dream, not in a memory, in reality. And what if time doesn't move forward at all, but only loops, again and again, until you notice the pattern? You wouldn't know, not unless you caught it. One tiny irregularity, one whisper of recognition, a pause in the rhythm, a feeling that this has happened already but you can't remember when. In this theory, time is not a line, it is a maze, and you are the echo trying to find its source. The moment you notice the pattern is the moment it might finally change. But what happens if you don't sit? Breathe in slowly, because it all begins where it always has. You blink, and it starts again. Not the day, not the hour. Something quieter, more hidden. The way your fingers move without thinking when you reach for the cup. The way your breath shortens just before a notification appears. The way silence falls in your room exactly 3 seconds after you speak a certain word. These are not accidents. They're not habits. They are markers. The loop doesn't begin loudly. It begins inside. In the places your attention forgets to look. In the motion of your eyes as they trace the same sentence twice, not realizing it. In the way your mind revisits an old thought as if it's new. It begins in the pause, the invisible comma between your actions. And the most haunting part? You think you're moving forward. You feel the illusion of progress. The ticking clock, the changing weather, the shifting moods of people around you. They all play along, reinforcing the idea that you're going somewhere. But under the hood of the universe, the gears aren't turning. They're circling. Imagine this, a film reel made of days, where someone has quietly spliced a duplicate copy of a scene back into the roll. You don't notice at first. You keep watching, living, acting. But if you were to rewind and pay attention, you'd see it. The same beat, the same movement, the same line spoken, not just once, but again. The loop is not always a full day or a dramatic event. It can be 5 minutes, a conversation fragment, a decision you keep making despite telling yourself you've learned. It loops in patterns of emotion, grief that returns without invitation, happiness that fades the same way every time, relationships that cycle through the same fights, the same reconciliations, the same silences. If you were to draw your life on a timeline, you might imagine a straight road, childhood to now, memory to dream. But if you could zoom out far enough, you'd see the line curve, spiral, knot. You'd see that today is not a new page. It's the same chapter, rewritten with slightly different punctuation. And you are not the author. You're the character who keeps turning around in the same hallway, mistaking each door for a new one. But even within the loop, something is watching, a deeper you. The one that feels the ache of familiarity in a brand new moment. The one that stops for no reason in the middle of the day, sensing something missed. That part of you has noticed. Not consciously, not with words, but with stillness. There's a reason children often feel like everything is new, while adults live in déjà vu. Children haven't lived long enough to spot the repetition. But you've had that sinking feeling before. The dread that comes not from fear but from recognition. You've said, "This feels familiar," and laughed it off. But what if that familiarity is the only clue? What if the loop keeps going until you catch it? In a dream, you don't realize you're dreaming until something strange happens, like a clock melting, or a person turning into someone else mid-sentence. But what if this waking world is no different? What if time keeps everything just normal enough to keep you asleep in it? You wake up every day, not knowing which part has already happened. And maybe that's the trap. The repetition is so subtle it doesn't raise alarms. It mimics novelty. It wears disguises. But beneath it is rhythm. A beat. The same cosmic melody repeating across your decisions, your doubts, your days. And maybe, just maybe, you've reached this point before. Maybe this exact theory, the one you're listening to now, has reached you in a previous cycle. The same voice, the same sentence, the same pause. Maybe this is the part where you start to wonder. Not with fear, not with certainty, but with curiosity. Because here's what no one tells you. The loop isn't a punishment. It's a message. It's the universe knocking gently on the inside of your thoughts, waiting for you to notice the pattern. And now that you have, the loop begins again. There it is again, that second you can't explain. The flicker of hesitation when entering a room you've never seen. but somehow feel you've been inside before. The eerie certainty that a stranger's words were already written in your memory, the smell of the air before it rains, not because you recognize the weather, but because it smells like something you lived already. You never questioned it. You moved past it, because it was small, because it didn't interrupt the story you told yourself about time. But that's exactly how it hides in the unnoticed moments. You're taught to focus on the big things. Milestones, anniversaries, dates that mark growth or decline, but the loop never announces itself on a calendar. It repeats through the unnoticed, a half smile, a forgotten itch, a breath you didn't know you were holding until it stopped. It's in the way your body turns slightly to the left when waiting, the way you check your phone at the same timestamp each night without realizing. It's not coincidence, it's not routine, it's evidence. If you pause long enough, you might remember walking this path with a different shirt, different weather, different mood, but the same step, the same bird call, the same pattern in the clouds. You told yourself it was just a feeling, but the feeling was the clue. There are places where time leaks, Sajid, in the creases of your awareness, when you forget what day it is, but remember the emotion of something that never happened, when you swear you've heard that exact thunderclap before, not just a similar one, but the same timing, the same pause before the sky split open. We call it déjà vu, because we need a label, something to box up the discomfort. But what if déjà vu is not a hiccup in the brain, it's your attention brushing against the curtain between loops, a curtain you've walked past so many times, it's worn thin. The familiar unnoticed moment is not a mistake, it is a checkpoint. Imagine time like a river, wide and still on the surface. You paddle across, believing each stroke brings you forward. But beneath, the current circles, and every now and then, you pass the same submerged stone. You don't see it, you feel it, a nudge, a pull, something in your stomach tightens, and you think, this again? The loop doesn't want you to panic. It wants you to listen. Every unnoticed moment is a test. Will you finally pay attention, not to the moment itself, but to its repetition, its haunting accuracy, the way your thoughts align too neatly with the past, the way your mind reacts before your senses confirm. You've felt this way before, and not just emotionally, precisely. You've watched the curtain move with no wind. You've walked through the same door and thought the same thought at the same angle of sunlight. These aren't sit accidents. They sit messages in code. You see, the loop disguises itself as normal life. It wears the clothes of boredom, the perfume of routine, but it's not boring. It's echoing. It's trying to show you something you keep forgetting. You've been here before. Not metaphorically. Literally. Here. Now. The moment you stop and feel it, really feel it, without brushing it away, that's when the curtain trembles. That's when time stutters. That's when you get close. Close to the crack in the reel, close to the fingerprint you left on this moment last time around. The familiar unnoticed moment is the crack in the hourglass. The one you always overlook because it doesn't demand your attention, but it waits, quietly, patiently, for the version of you who finally notices, not just the moment, but the pattern. And now that you've noticed, we return. You think memory is a line, a drawer of moments, neatly organized by time. First this happened, then that, then you moved on. But what if that drawer doesn't open forward? What if it pulls you backward, again and again, each time you think you're making progress? Memory doesn't move the way you think it does. It loops, it tugs, and sometimes it resets without permission. There's a specific kind of forgetting you've experienced, a moment when you walk into a room and can't remember why, not a lapse, a reset, like you've just been returned to the beginning of a thought. You weren't confused, you were rewound, back to the frame where the thought first began. You've mistaken this for absent-mindedness, but the truth is quieter. Memory doesn't always serve you. Sometimes, it traps you. It pulls you back to familiar responses, old feelings, ancient decisions dressed in modern clothing. You think you're remembering something new, but you're reliving something precise. You argue with someone, and say the same words you swore you'd never say again. You feel heartbreak and it aches in the same sequence, like choreography learned too well. You wake from a dream, and the details are gone, but the mood lingers because it's not the first time you've had it. This isn't statin, nostalgia. It's statis, evidence. Have you ever paused mid-thought and whispered, Why do I always do this? That's not rhetorical. That's a sign. A glitch in the loop. The script slipping out of your mouth too easily. You think you're growing, evolving, changing, but your memory replays the same emotional track underneath, and you're dancing to it. You see, time isn't linear, neither is memory. What feels like progress is often a loop played at a slightly different angle. The scenery changes, the people rotate, but the script, the music, it's recycled. And when you finally start to hear the repeated verse, it's jarring. You might think, I already learned this lesson. Yes, you have. That's what the loop relies on. Memory isn't passive, it's not a vault, it's a mirror, and mirrors reflect what's already there, over and over, until you look behind them. That ache in your chest when someone leaves. That same ache played out in childhood, in teenage years, in every quiet goodbye. Each time you thought it was new, it wasn't. It was the same chord struck again, just louder or softer depending on how much you were willing to hear. And sometimes, memory rewinds not just feelings, but entire moments. You dream of a street that doesn't exist. Then one day you walk down it. A face appears that you know though you've never met. You recall a sentence someone is about to say before they speak it. You chalk it up to coincidence. Your brain trying to make sense of patterns. But what if your brain is inventing patterns? What if it's sex revealing them? Every time memory rewinds, it gives you a chance not just to relive, but to notice, to observe without collapsing into the performance. To say, I know this scene, I've been here, and when you do the loop trembles, it slows, the track jumps, because awareness disrupts repetition. But most of the time, we miss it. We continue, unaware that we sit walking through a memory pretending to be the present. And when you do notice, it doesn't scream, it whispers, we done this already. Not because the world is broken, but because you haven't seen the pattern clearly enough. And once again, memory rewinds. Quiet, circular, precise. Until you stop pretending that the dream is a first draft and admit that it's a rehearsal. One you have done before, and one you said doing again. At first glance, it feels like nothing, just a hiccup, a hesitation in your day. You reach for the light switch and pause, confused why your hand is already there. You leave your home and check twice to see if the door was locked, but you don't remember unlocking it in the first place. You walk the same path to the same place, and yet something feels tilted, just slightly off. This is the glitch. Not in the universe. In the routine. We live by rhythm. Wake, eat, work, pause, sleep. Days stack like bricks, and we take comfort in their repetition. But what if that repetition isn't for stability, but control? What if the routine is not helping you move forward, but keeping you in place, like a treadmill dressed as a staircase? Every loop begins by mimicking comfort. The same coffee mug, the same weather app check, the same background noise as you scroll, and you don't question it, because it feels safe. But deep inside that safety is a fault line. A small fracture that, if stared at too long, reveals too much. It's not the big surprises that reveal the loop. It's the soft, invisible cracks. The moments when your body moves before your mind decides. When your morning playlist seems to know your mood before you press play. When a stranger finishes your sentence. Not in a romantic way, but as if reading from a script you've both forgotten writing. It sips not déjà vu. It sips a seam showing. Sometimes, the glitch comes as absence. A word you always say that suddenly disappears. A step in your process that goes missing. The emotional weight of an action that once moved you but now feels hollow. Something once alive goes mechanical, automatic. And in that automation you begin to drift. Not forward but backward. Your brain loves patterns. It rewards you for repeating behavior. Dopamine for routine. Security in habit. But the loop exploits this. It dresses itself as your comfort zone, then slips the same hour into your life over and over. And because the glitch is gentle, because it doesn't shout, you don't recognize it as a signal. You call it burnout. You call it disconnection. You think, I'm tired, I'm distracted. But what if you're not? What if you're noticing? A glitch is not an error. It sips a question. Do you see me yet? You sit in a meeting and forget whether this conversation happened before. You enter a grocery store and swear the person by the fruit stand was standing there last week, in the same shirt, with the same oranges. You tell yourself, coincidence, But that's not what your body believes. Your body holds tension, and the tension is memory. In the script of your life, there are lines you've said dozens of times without noticing, phrases you fall back on, laughter you force at the same beats, glitches in your own behavior that only the silent part of you catches, the part that watches. So when the glitch comes again, and it will, don't flinch. Don't push it away. Let it sit. Let it unfold. Let yourself feel the jagged edge of the repetition. And ask, have I done this before? If the answer arrives without sound, just a quiet certainty in your chest, you're getting close. You've touched the thread. You've seen the fold. And somewhere behind that moment, the loop watches, waiting to begin again. You think silence is empty, that it means nothing is happening. But in the world beneath words, in the pause between thoughts, something is always moving. Time does not only speak through clocks or chaos. Sometimes it speaks in patterns too quiet to be heard. You feel them, but you rarely listen, because the silence is disguised as stillness. But what if the silence is where the loop breathes? There's a rhythm in your life that no one taught you. A rhythm you've followed without meaning to. Wake at the same minute. Stare at the wall the same way. Forget something important. Again. Then the silence creeps in. Not just absence of sound, but the moment after an action where nothing needs to be said, because it's already been lived before. That's the hidden signature of repetition. Not in noise, but in what follows it. In every conversation, there's a moment of pause where you recognize the pattern. Not in words, but in timing. The same joke lands too perfectly. The argument stutters on the same beat. The silence stretches, and suddenly you feel watched, not by someone else, but by time itself. It knows you've been here, and it's waiting for you to notice. Silence becomes the mirror. Have you ever stared out a window with no thought in your head, and yet your body felt familiar with that stillness? Not peaceful, haunted, because somewhere, deep inside, it wasn't the first time. That exact scene, the light, the quiet, your posture, had already happened. Because in silence, your defenses lower. You stop performing, you stop narrating, and that's when the repetition slips through, without resistance, without sound. This is the moment the loop leans in. What time is it right now as you supper listening? Look around you. Let's do something different now. What place are you in? Your room, your office, your bed, a car, a hallway. What country are you in? What weather is outside your window? Say it out loud, or whisper it, or think it. Pause. Now ask yourself, have I done this exact thing before? At this time, in this mood, with this thought inside me? If something shivers inside your memory, just slightly, you've found the pattern. Not because the environment is unique, but because your attention has shifted. For once, you're not filling the silence, you're hearing it. You see, the loop doesn't require chaos to sustain itself. It feeds on autopilot. It survives in the places you ignore, the cracks between events, the breath before your next move, the question you avoid because you know the answer is always the same. That sits where the pattern lives. You've looked for proof of time's illusion in grand ideas, simulation theory, alternate dimensions, metaphysics, but the truth doesn't always live in theories. Sometimes it lives in the 3 seconds after a sentence ends, the moment where your brain resets before you decide what to do next. The silence between actions is where the loop takes root, and the more you notice, the louder that silence becomes. It's not empty anymore. It's thick with implication. It's holding something, a blueprint, a map of your repetitions. You don't see it yet, but you feel the shape. A circular shape, a spiral, a return. And so, once again, the silence ends. And the pattern continues. There are things you do every day that you no longer notice. The way you tap your fingers while waiting, the exact number of steps you take from your bed to the door, the song that plays in your head while brushing your teeth. These aren't habits, they're recordings. Not made by choice, but by time. We tell ourselves habits are ours, that we shape them, that we build our lives with discipline and routine. But what if that's a trick? What if habit is the loop's camouflage, a way to embed itself deeper while convincing you that you're in control? Habits are repetitive by nature, but not all repetition is conscious, and not all habit is growth. Some habits aren't created, they're inherited, not from your parents or your culture, but from a prior loop, from a version of you that did all of this before, and passed it down like instinct, like muscle memory echoing through realities. There's a moment, right before you act, where something ancient takes over. You're not deciding to do the thing, you're reenacting it, replaying a ritual. You check your notifications without realizing you picked up your phone. You tie your laces without remembering bending down. You walk the same path, eyes glazed, as if your feet already knew the steps. They did. This is the choreography of repetition. Time doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it repeats through comfort, through convenience, through automation. And every time you let a habit run without awareness, the loop tightens, not like a trap, but like a dance you never agreed to. That's why change is so hard. Not because you're weak, but because you're trying to edit a story that keeps rewriting itself the same way. Habits are the ink, repetition is the pen, and you're the character stuck between pages. Sometimes, you try to break the pattern, you make a bold decision, you disrupt your schedule, you go somewhere new, and for a moment, you feel awake, alive, but soon the loop adapts. It swallows the newness, turns it into routine, and the habit returns, dressed in new colors, but humming the same tune. You eat at different restaurants, but order the same kind of food. You date new people, but feel the same ending approaching. You move to a new city, but walk with the same posture, speak with the same phrases, feel the same fears. The loop doesn't care about your environment. It survives in your habits. And yet, within those habits, lies the crack. Because every habit holds a moment where you could choose, a moment so fast you usually miss it. But if you catch it, if you pause right before the spoon hits the bowl, right before the sigh leaves your lips, right before the excuse forms in your throat, if you catch that flicker, you might see the loop. You might ask, why do I always do this? And the question itself becomes the break. A tiny tear in the film reel, a flash of awareness that wasn't there the last time. Noticing the habit is not enough, but noticing the repetition inside the habit, that's the beginning of something different, a kind of rebellion. The loop doesn't fear chaos, it fears consciousness. Because once you notice the patterns hiding in your habits, the routine loses its grip, the script becomes visible, the steps feel mechanical, and you stop dancing on command. And that sips when the loop hesitates. Just for a moment. Long enough for you to see it staring back. Yesterday never really leaves, it just changes clothes. You wake up thinking it's a new day, and for the most part, everything agrees with you. The sun is in a slightly different spot, your phone has fresh notifications, the cereal box is a little more empty. But beneath those small shifts, yesterday still lingers. Its shadow moves with you. You don't see it directly, but you feel its presence, in the way your thoughts lean towards certain outcomes before they even unfold, in the way you flinch at moments that shouldn't frighten you anymore, in the way you react to a word, a look, a silence, as if you already know what it means, because you do. You've seen this day before, not exactly, but close enough. And that sips how the loop survives. Yesterday isn't just a memory, it's a blueprint. It maps your actions, your feelings, your hesitations, and unless you interrupt the cycle, that blueprint gets copied and laid over today like tracing paper. You think you're creating something new, but you're just following the faint lines from before. It's subtle. You don't wake up and think, today will be the same as yesterday. You tell yourself it'll be different. You believe it. But then you find yourself doing the same things, feeling the same way, thinking the same thoughts, and you wonder why the change never really arrives. That sips because yesterday is still moving. It moves in your tone, the sharpness you carry from an old argument, the tiredness of trying again, the numb repetition of pretending to care about a meeting, a message, a moment that feels like a ghost from last week. You're living forward, but feeling backward. Even your posture remembers yesterday. The way your shoulders hold attention you didn't stretch out. The way your eyes scan for patterns that hurt you once. The way you laugh half a second too late. Not because you're slow, but because you've heard this joke before, and yesterday didn't find it funny either. Time, when it loops, doesn't repeat exactly. That's why it tricks you. It changes the set dressing, different clothes, different people, but the emotional rhythm remains identical. And you follow it like a song you can't stop humming, because it's familiar, because it feels safe, even if it isn't. And when you feel stuck, you blame yourself. You say you're lazy, unmotivated, unlucky. But what if you're none of those things? What if you're just trapped in a sequence that's playing without your consent? A pattern looping through your biology, your memory, your behaviors, and every attempt to break it feels like swimming upstream, not because you're failing, but because the current is yesterday pulling you back. Sometimes, you'll see yesterday reflected in others. A friend finishes your sentence before you speak. A stranger responds with exactly the tone you feared. A lover reenacts a fight you thought you'd outgrown, and you wonder, why does this keep happening to me? Because it's not happening to you. It's happening through you. The loop is using you as a vessel, and every shadow from yesterday that hasn't been addressed gets projected onto the wall of today. It moves when you move. It speaks when you speak. It hides inside every unfinished feeling. But here's the strange part. Yesterday's shadow is also trying to help. It's not here to trap you. It's here to reveal something you didn't see before. A truth that keeps slipping through your fingers. A pattern that wants to be noticed, not suppressed. It appears when you react too quickly. When you say, not this again, but you're not sure why. When you see the same number on a clock for the third day in a row. When you hear a song you haven't played in years, and it lands too perfectly on your mood. That's not nostalgia. That's alignment. The loop is syncing you up. Not for comfort, but for confrontation. If you pay close attention, you'll start to catch yesterday following you, in thoughts that don't belong to today, in fears that don't match the moment, in cravings that appear without cause. And once you see it, you can ask a new kind of question. Not what's wrong with me, but where have I seen this before? That question changes everything. Because it turns your awareness inward. It invites you to trace the emotion back to its root. Not to fix it, but to observe it. To stand still while the shadow passes. To say, I see you. I know what you are. And in that moment, the loop pauses. Only for a second. But it's enough. Enough to shift the next step. Enough to alter the rhythm. Enough to let today become something other than a remix of what's already happened. Yesterday's shadow moves, but it doesn't have to lead. If you walk slowly enough, you might even see where it ends. There is a kind of performance happening in your life. A reenactment so subtle, so flawlessly disguised. You mistake it for reality. You go about your day, believing each choice is new, each moment original. But beneath your decisions is a stage one you didn't build. And on that stage, the same scene plays out again and again. Slight changes in lighting, different props, but the script, it hasn't changed. You think you're reacting to life in real time, that you're deciding what to say, where to go, how to feel. But what if you're just acting out a role written by a past version of yourself? A version trapped in emotional memory, behavioral grooves, learned scripts. There's a name for it. Reenactment. In psychology, it's the silent force that makes us return to old wounds, old roles, old dynamics. A person abandoned once becomes someone who always expects abandonment. A child silenced grows into an adult who hesitates before speaking, not because of fear, but because the scene demands it. It's what the script says. And it doesn't stop with people. Places carry reenactment too. You might find yourself returning to the same kind of job, the same type of apartment, the same feeling of stagnation. You say, this always happens to me, but it's not happening to you. You're performing it, unconsciously, as if caught in a time-looped play. The loop doesn't need you to know your lines. It just needs you to feel them. Let sense break it down. You're in a conversation, and suddenly, you feel defensive. Not because of what was said, but because you've had this conversation before, with a different face, different setting, but the same emotional rhythm. You tense up. You answer, in a way you always do. You say what you said last time. You regret it again. That sips reenactment. That sips the loop in costume. Sometimes it's so precise. It feels supernatural. You meet someone new and feel drawn to them. Not by chemistry, but by repetition. They remind you of someone else. Not in look, but in emotional texture. A familiarity that feels comforting. Until the same dynamic emerges. The same misunderstanding. The same ending. You stir not cursed. You stir reenacting. And here's the dangerous part. Reenactment feels like truth. It feels like who you are. You don't recognize it as a pattern, because it's laced with identity. You say, that's just how I am. But what if it's not? What if it's just how you've always reacted in this loop? What if the you that exists outside the reenactment has never been given room to speak? There's a moment in every reenactment when time freezes. Briefly, right before you say the same thing, right before you pick the same reaction. If you pause, just long enough, you'll feel the tension. that split-second discomfort of choosing something different, the pull of the script begging you to stay predictable. But you don't have to. You can pause, you can improvise. Improvisation breaks the spell. It short-circuits the loop, not by force, but by curiosity. Instead of saying what you always say, ask a question. Instead of reacting, remain silent. Instead of assuming the next line, wait and see. In that space, the pattern begins to unravel. The scene stutters. The actors forget their marks. The timeless reenactment collapses. Because the loop depends on your predictability, it thrives on your participation. Every reenactment is a closed circuit. It requires you to forget that you've done this before. That's why it rewards you with familiarity. It offers comfort, even in pain, because repetition feels safe. You've survived it once, so you trust it, even if it hurts. But the cost of safety is freedom. You don't get to choose your next act while stuck in the last one. You don't get to evolve while playing the same emotional role, and deep down you know this. That's why certain days feel like déjà vu without memory, why certain decisions feel preloaded, why time feels like it's repeating, not in events but in essence. Here sits the truth, hiding in the reenactment. The loop isn't trying to trap you, it's trying to reveal you. Reveal the places where you're still repeating pain. Reveal the habits that no longer serve. Reveal the character you've been playing so long you forgot it was a costume. You want change? Then improvise. Break one line, one gesture, one decision. Not with force, but with awareness. Because in the moment you stop following the script, you become the observer, and the observer cannot be trapped. Time cannot loop around someone who notices they're inside a loop. So when the stage lights dim, and the same scene begins again, pause, feel the edges of the moment. Notice the cues. Ask yourself, is this new or just familiar? And if it's familiar, ask, do I want to play this part again? Because the play will continue. But now, you know it's a play. And that changes everything. You wake up thinking your thoughts are new. You believe this morning's worries are original, that your doubts are freshly grown, that your ideas born in the privacy of your mind belong only to this version of you, this moment in time. But if you slow down, if you listen more closely, you might notice something else entirely. Your thoughts echo, not in the poetic sense, in the mathematical one. You thought this before. The shape of the fear, the pacing of the inner monologue, the exact pattern of imagining failure before it happens. You've had these thoughts, not once, but repeatedly. Maybe they were dressed differently. Maybe the topic changed, but the tone, the rhythm, the emotional conclusion, that part remained the same. You are thinking in circles. This is the illusion of novelty. You feel like you're facing a new challenge, a new emotion, a new decision, but the voice inside you is not reacting, it's reenacting, responding with the same thoughts it's always used, because your mind isn't just a processor of the present, it's a recycling machine for the past. You say you fur over it, but your thoughts are not. They hold onto patterns longer than your memories do. They build grooves in your attention, like a record spinning in a locked loop. And once you're in that groove, you don't notice, because the loop sounds like you. Let's look at how it works. You encounter a challenge, let's say, you feel ignored. Your mind jumps. They're doing this on purpose. Maybe it's true, maybe not. But you've had this reaction before, not just once, dozens of times. The situation changes. The people rotate, but the thought remains intact. And before you even check reality, you've believed it again. Why? Because it's familiar. Because your brain prefers efficiency over accuracy. It doesn't want to think. It wants to repeat. Because repetition feels safe. It conserves energy. It provides identity. This is how I think. This is who I am. And that belief locks the loop in place. But what if it's not who you are? What if it's just a leftover thought, echoing from before? We all inherit thinking patterns. Some from childhood, some from trauma, some from repetition. So quiet we never noticed. And those patterns get filed under truth. Not because they're true, but because they've been repeated enough to feel real. This is how loops live in the mind. They don't need time to repeat. They just need you to think the same thing in response to a trigger, again and again, until the thought becomes an instinct. And then, an identity. You think you're reflecting, but you're replaying. You might even feel trapped in a certain kind of mood, anxiety, guilt, dread, and when you trace it back, you find the same root cause every time, the same narrative, the same internal script that runs in the background while you go about your life. And it never fully resolves, because it's not meant to. It's not a thought designed to solve a problem. It's a loop designed to sustain itself. You think, I'll never be good enough. Then you find evidence. You compare. You shrink. You promise to do better. And for a moment, you feel motivated. But days later, the thought returns. Not because your life got worse, but because the loop needs to reset. It feeds on your attention. And the more energy you give it, by analyzing it, fighting it, believing it, the tighter the circuit becomes, until you can't tell the difference between thinking and repeating, between awareness and programming. But here sits where it changes. When you watch the thought instead of becoming it, there's a gap between a thought and the self. A small one, just wide enough to fit your awareness, and when you place your attention in that space, something strange happens. The thought loses its grip. You don't resist it. You don't replace it. You simply notice, I've had this thought before, and in that moment, the loop hesitates. Because loops rely on unconscious participation, they need you to believe they are real, urgent, necessary. Once you start recognizing patterns, the urgency dissolves. And what's left is something simpler. Repetition. Not truth. Not prophecy. Just a pattern of mental energy that has played itself out too many times. Now ask yourself this. What's one thought that keeps returning in your life? It might show up in different forms. I'm behind. I'm not seen. I'm not ready. Trace it back. How many times has it arrived? In how many situations? How much of your identity has wrapped around this one repeated script? And more importantly, who would you be without it? Because if your thoughts are echoes from before, then perhaps your sense of self is just an accumulation of unexamined noise. Not a solid thing, but a loop pretending to be you. When you break the pattern, when you observe it instead of obey it, you discover something unexpected. The mind has no loyalty. It's not trying to hurt or heal. It's just trying to repeat. Because that's what it does. Unless, of course, you notice. And when you do, something subtle shifts. Not the thoughts themselves, but the space around them. That space is where the loop ends. There is a moment before every decision, where time holds its breath. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It comes as stillness, a fraction of a second when your body waits, your mind stutters, your awareness flickers. And then, as if waking from nothing, you choose, or at least you think you do. But what if the choice has already been made? What if that pause isn't hesitation, but repetition? Think of it. You're about to speak. You stop. Not because you're reconsidering, but because something inside you already knows how this ends. The pause doesn't create space. It reenacts it. You've paused like this before. Same beat, same breath, same gravity. We imagine pauses as opportunities. A moment to reroute, to correct, to reflect. But in the loop, the pause is part of the pattern. A built-in beat between motions, like the rest in a piece of music. It doesn't interrupt the rhythm. It sustains it. And once you notice it, it seeps everywhere. Before you respond to criticism, pause. Before you send a message you know you'll regret, pause. Before you lie and call it protection, pause. But here's the haunting part. Those pauses feel like chances to do better, and yet how often do you repeat the same action afterward? Over time, the pause becomes a rehearsal. You're not hesitating. You're preparing, not for something new, but for the same move you always make. You've done this before. The same inner debate, the same tiny war. And each time the pause becomes more predictable, more practiced. It fits perfectly into the choreography of your reactions. The loop isn't made of events. It's made of beats, and the pause is one of its most sacred. Let sips make it clearer. You're walking into a difficult conversation. You've rehearsed your response. You know what to say. But just as the words rise up, you pause, you swallow, you speak differently. Not because of strategy, because you've done this before. You've learned, over repeated cycles, how this ends. So your body remembers, and the pause becomes protection. But protection from what? From disruption, from breaking the loop. Because beneath the pause is fear, not always of failure, but of change. The moment you act differently, You become unfamiliar, and your mind doesn't like unfamiliar. So it pulls you back to the pause, to the moment before movement, and it asks, "Are you sure?" And if you don't recognize that voice as the loop, you'll answer from habit. The pause is also where guilt hides. You almost said no. You almost walked away. You almost told the truth. But the pause softened the edge. It gave your loop enough time to replay the fear, the memory, the conditioning, and so, once again, you followed the script. It sips a kind of emotional muscle memory. Your nervous system, your breath, your posture, they all respond before your conscious mind catches up. And just like a dancer who's practiced the same steps for years, you fall into formation. The pause is the downbeat before the move. But there's a gift buried inside this repetition. Because if you can recognize the pause, truly feel it, not as indecision but as ritual, you can use it, you can turn the performance into presence, you can break the spell before it finishes. The loop depends on unconscious pauses. But a conscious pause is a weapon. Try this. Next time you feel yourself hesitate, don't push through it, don't rush to act, don't try to fix it, just stay in the pause. Observe what fills the silence, watch what thoughts rise up, hear the loop trying to cue your next line, and then choose something different. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Maybe you breathe instead of speak, maybe you say less instead of more, maybe you walk away, not in defeat, but in clarity. In that tiny deviation, the pattern wavers, the loop stutters because you've broken rhythm, and the loop hates losing rhythm. You might not feel it at first. The change might be invisible, but inside, a different groove is forming, one that doesn't belong to yesterday, one that wasn't written by the fear of how things usually go. That's how new timelines begin. Not in grand decisions, but in tiny interruptions. Not in revolutions, but in rewired pauses. Here's something else to consider. Some of the most profound changes in your life will begin in moments that look like nothing. A half-second pause, a glance you hold longer than usual, a sentence you almost said but didn't. These are the hinge points of time. They're quiet, forgettable, but they shift the loop by 1 degree, and over time, that degree becomes distance, and that distance becomes freedom. Because when the pause stops being a reenactment and starts becoming a question, you're no longer just inside the loop, you're watching it. And what the loop cannot survive is being seen. So pause. Not to stall, not to delay, but to choose. This time, on purpose. You wear time like a second skin, every moment mapped by numbers, every action measured by hours and minutes. You glance at the clock to ground yourself, to prove that things are moving, that life is ticking forward, that the loop isn't real. But what happens when the clock forgets? It happens more than you notice. You look at the time and feel disoriented. Wasn't it 2:15 just a moment ago? How is it still 2:15? Or how is it already 5:30 when you just sat down? These aren't scheduling errors. These are symptoms. Not of distraction, but of looping. Time as measured by clocks is a human construct, a framework we built to make life feel linear. But clocks don't account for perception, for attention, for memory, and when your perception starts to loop, the clock becomes a liar. Have you ever spent an entire day feeling like only an hour passed? Or sat through 10 minutes that dragged like eternity? That's not imagination. That's your mind losing sync with the agreed illusion. That's when time reveals its instability, its tendency to echo. In loops, clocks don't break, they blur. This is how the loop hides. By convincing you that change is occurring, even when everything is cycling, you see the digits change. The hands move. You're told, time is passing. But your mind isn't fooled. It feels the stasis beneath the movement, the repetition under the ticking. And deep down you know, you've stared at your ceiling on a Sunday afternoon, watching the light shift ever so slightly, thinking, wasn't this last week, or last year, or always, the same quiet, the same shadows, the same emotional tone of stillness? And though you couldn't name it, the thought arrived. This moment has happened before. That's not a poetic sentiment. That's a memory the loop failed to erase. You might also feel it in transitions, getting into a car, stepping out of a shower, standing in line. Time softens in those pockets. It stretches or contracts, not because the environment changes, but because your awareness does. and when awareness sharpens, the illusion thins, the loop's mechanics become visible. This is when clocks betray you. Because in a loop, time doesn't move forward, it rotates. The same moments recur, layered with slight difference. The date might be different, but the essence is preserved. A Tuesday that feels like every other Tuesday, a birthday that echoes the melancholy of 5 birthdays before it, a new year that tastes identical to the one you swore would be different. Time becomes texture, not measurement. And clocks? They keep ticking because they must, not because they mean anything. You've had moments where you forgot the day of the week, where you paused before writing the date, where you swore something happened recently, only to find out it was months ago. These are not just cognitive glitches, they are fractures, indicators that the loop is bending your internal chronology. And here's the question that brings the loop into focus. If time is truly moving forward, why do your days feel so familiar? Not just in action, but in weight, in emotion, in rhythm. Why do you return to the same feelings at the same hour every day? Why does sadness visit at 3 p.m. and fade by 4 o'clock, only to return tomorrow like a scheduled broadcast? Why does inspiration strike only at night, as if waiting in the wings for the cue? Because even your emotions run on a looped clock. Not the one on your wrist. The one inside you. The loop doesn't operate by seconds or minutes. It works in cycles, memory cycles, attention cycles, energetic patterns that recycle like coded sequences, and the deeper you fall into habit, the stronger those cycles become. You don't need to believe in time travel to be stuck in a time loop. You just need to notice how much of your life is being repeated, on schedule. But there sits a crack in this illusion. It comes in the moments when the clock should matter, but doesn't. Like when you sit in traffic and forget what day it is, or when you find yourself staring at the microwave countdown and wondering why your thoughts are identical to last week's, or when a notification pings at the exact time it did yesterday and you feel something ancient stir. This is the same. These are invitations. Invitations to stop using clocks as proof of movement. Because movement isn't set the same as progress. And repetition isn't always visible until you step outside the measured time. So next time you check the time, don't just note the number. Ask yourself, what else have I done at this exact minute? What thought always returns at this hour? That sits where the real clock lives. Not on the wall, but in your rhythm. And if the rhythm keeps playing the same tune, maybe it sips not time that forgot. Maybe it sips you, remembering too late. There are loops in your mind you've never mapped. Not because they're hidden, but because they're too familiar. So familiar, they blur into the background. Thought becomes reflex. Emotion becomes scenery. You don't even notice you're repeating. But you are. You stir not living thought to thought. You're cycling, again and again, through the same mental terrain. And here's the trick. These mental cycles don't need external triggers. They don't wait for a person, a place, a problem. They're self-sustaining. Once activated, they run on memory, on prediction, on the electricity of old emotions stored in your body like echoes. You don't think your thoughts, you orbit them. It starts with a cue, a certain silence, a certain light through the window, a certain tone in someone's voice, and without realizing it, your mind reaches for a script, the same set of concerns, the same internal questions, the same loops disguised as insight. Am I doing enough? Why did they say that? What if I mess this up again? You call this overthinking, but it's not about quantity. It's about shape. These thoughts aren't random. They're recursive. They feed each other. One worry becomes 10. One judgment becomes a narrative. And before long, you're back at the same starting point. Not because you failed to solve it, but because your mind needs something to chew. The mind is a pattern machine. It doesn't want stillness. It wants stimulation. But new patterns are hard to form. Old ones are easy to retrieve. So it drags you back into familiar loops. Thoughts you've already had, scenarios you've already imagined, wounds you've already reopened, and convinced yourself you hadn't. This is how a thought becomes a cycle. It returns when it sips not invited. It speaks in your voice. It convinces you that something must be wrong. And then it leaves, only to come back again later, dressed in slightly different words. You assume this is anxiety, or indecision, or trauma. But what if it's the loop whispering? Again, again, again. Mental cycles are not always loud. Some of them are disguised as self-care, as productivity, as planning. You make the same to-do lists, organize the same folders, clean the same room to the same soundtrack over and over, because it feels like progress. But it's not. It's a ritual. You stir not fixing the problem. You stir maintaining the loop. And it sits exhausting, isn't it? Because no matter how much you think, the resolution never arrives. You tell yourself, if I just think this through one more time, I'll feel better. But you don't. You never do. Because the cycle doesn't lead to answers. It leads to itself. The thoughts are designed to keep spinning. Sometimes, it goes deeper. You revisit the same emotional narrative daily. Guilt, shame, unworthiness. Not because your life is bad, but because those emotions have become your baseline. They are the gravity in your mental orbit. Without them, you feel unmoored. You may even resist healing, not because you like suffering, but because suffering is familiar. It gives the mind something to do, something to solve, something to loop. It becomes your rhythm. And breaking rhythm feels like breaking yourself. But you are not your thoughts. You are the space that watches them spin. This is where awareness becomes intervention. When you begin to notice not just what you think, but how often you return to the same mental corners, something cracks open. You start to feel the repetition. You recognize that today's anxiety is just yesterday's worry with a new coat of paint. You begin to ask, wait, haven't I already been here? That sips the moment the loop wavers. Awareness doesn't stop the thoughts, but it exposes the architecture. And once you see the design, the way one thought leads to another, the way tension builds predictably, the way your focus tightens around the same themes, you stop believing everything you think. You stop confusing noise with truth. Try this exercise. The next time your mind spirals, pause and ask, when did I last think this exact thought? Trace it. Go back. Was it last week? Yesterday? This morning? If you're honest, you'll find you've been here before, and not just once. The mental cycle is ancient. It lives in grooves carved by repetition, and your job is not to escape it, but to recognize when you're inside it. Because recognition is the only way out. You don't break the loop by force. You break it by refusing to follow it blindly. You breathe. You observe. You let the thought play out without adding energy, without resisting, without attaching. And in that quiet defiance, the cycle loses momentum. The thought returns. You smile. The emotion rises. You let it. The urge to analyze appears. You stay still. And suddenly, you are not cycling. You percent. That presence, the part of you that watches without spiraling, that sips the true self beneath the loop, the witness, the stillness behind the storm, the consciousness that remembers what the loop tried to make you forget. You don't have to think what you've always thought. There is space beyond the cycle, and you're standing in it now. Look closely, and you still see it. Not in the seconds, not in the days, but in the pattern behind them. Time doesn't always look forward. Sometimes it looks back, not to remember, but to reflect, to show you yourself, not who you think you are, but who you've been, again and again. This is the mirror. And time holds it up more often than you notice. You wake into a morning that feels too familiar. You hear a phrase that stops you because you've heard it somewhere. Maybe in a dream, maybe in another version of now. You see someone smile, and it unlocks a feeling so specific, so sharp, it couldn't be random. These are not just coincidences, these are reflections. Time isn't just passing, it's watching, it's bouncing back every version of you you've already been. In the mirror of time, your past selves never leave. They circle, they linger, they influence how you stand, how you speak, how you love. You're not as free as you believe. You're not building yourself from scratch each day. You're rearranging old pieces, repeating gestures that were formed long ago, trying to create something new from old instructions. But the mirror never lies. When you find yourself caught in the same conversation, same tension, same silence, same ending, you're not stuck in bad luck. You're staring into the reflection, a loop of unresolved energy, coming back not to punish you, but to ask, do you see it now? Because that sips all the mirror wants: recognition. Time reflects your choices, your reactions, your beliefs. You think you've moved on from that chapter, but here it is again, same script, new cast. You swear you're evolving, but then someone presses the same old button in your chest, and you respond the way you always have. and you wonder why. It sits because the mirror is still in front of you. It doesn't matter how many years pass if the rhythm remains, if the emotion repeats, if your internal world still orbits the same sun of memory, time will echo it until you finally face the shape of what it's showing you. And here's the thing most people miss. The mirror isn't cruel, it's precise. It doesn't just reflect what you've done, it reflects what you haven't healed, the guilt you never processed, the forgiveness you withheld, the silence you accepted instead of the truth. These moments grow shadows, and shadows are loyal. They follow you into every new chapter until you finally turn around. Sometimes, the reflection shows up as someone else, a stranger whose energy feels too specific, a friend who triggers something you thought you buried, a lover who makes the same wound hurt in the same way. You might blame them, but the loop doesn't care about blame. It only cares about patterns. It asks, will you see it this time? There's a moment when the mirror turns sharp, usually during solitude, late night, just before sleep, or in the middle of something quiet, like washing dishes or walking alone. You feel it, a strange alignment, like everything slows down, and you get the unsettling feeling, I've done this exact thing before, felt this exact thing, thought this exact thought. And maybe you have. Maybe this version of you has lived 1,000 reflections already, not in a science fiction timeline, but in the repetition of mind, of behavior, of soul. Because time doesn't move in a straight line. It loops like water in a fountain. It rises, falls, rises again. And you think each drop is new, but it's the same water, cycling back, over and over. The mind is no different. You look at today and believe it's original, but it's stitched with yesterday's fabric. You respond to the world through mirrors, memories reflected in new situations. You're not reacting to what is. You're reacting to what was. Until you stop. Until you look directly into the glass. That's where freedom lives. Not in escaping the mirror, but in recognizing it. In saying, this again. And not running from it. Not blaming it. Just watching it. And then choosing to respond differently. Not because you step forcing change, but because you sit tired of the same reflection. That sips when the loop begins to weaken. Because loops don't survive your awareness. They survive your automation, your sleepwalking, your unconscious reenactment of pain. Once you bring a flashlight into the pattern, once you illuminate the mirror for what it is, a feedback system, not a trap, it loses its grip. So next time you feel the weight of familiarity pressing down, ask yourself, is this now? Or is this a reflection? Is this a moment? Or a mirror? And if it's a mirror, say thank you, because you've been given another chance, not to escape time, but to see through it, to look into its glass, recognize the face staring back and wave. Because maybe, just maybe, that version of you has been waiting to be acknowledged, not fixed, not avoided, just seen. And once it sits seen, it doesn't need to return. Not like before. You do it again. You don't know why. You didn't mean to. You told yourself last time was the last time. But here you are, again. Same thought, same habit, same emotional reaction. And the strange thing is, it feels automatic, as if the decision made itself, as if you woke up mid-action. You didn't plan it, but you did it anyway. This is one of the loop's most powerful disguises, repetition without reason, behavior that returns without logic, emotional spirals that arrive without warning. You think you've outgrown something, evolved beyond it, moved past it, and then, in a moment of vulnerability, it rises like it never left. And you ask yourself, why am I doing this again? But there's no clear answer, just a haunting familiarity, a script written in a language your conscious mind doesn't speak. Something in your bones recognizes the rhythm, even as your thoughts try to rebel. It's almost like watching yourself from a distance. You say the same sentence that ended things last time. You walk into the same argument, using the same justifications. You reach for the same comfort that doesn't really comfort you. And afterward, you're left staring at yourself, wondering, wasn't I past this? That sips the cruelty of unconscious repetition. It feels like betrayal, but it's not. It's a signal. A crack in the illusion of linear growth. A reminder that change isn't a straight climb, it's a spiral staircase. And on that staircase, you often revisit the same floor, just from a slightly higher, or sometimes eerily identical, angle. You are not broken. You stir looping, not because you stir weak, but because the pattern is strong. It's stronger than memory, stronger than logic. It lives in your nervous system, in your subconscious, in the stories you've told yourself so many times. They no longer sound like stories, they sound like truth. And the most frustrating part? You don't always catch it in time. You only realize it after you've said too much. After you've slipped back into the dynamic you swore you'd never return to. After you've made the choice that costs you peace, and it feels like losing to something invisible. But maybe it sits not invisible. Maybe it sits just fast, familiar, practiced. Because the loop doesn't need you to believe in it. It only needs you to forget that you've been here before, to act without pausing, to mistake instinct for wisdom, to repeat out of recognition, not desire. And so again, you find yourself mid-pattern, the moment already in motion, the consequence already arriving. But here sits the quiet truth behind it. The moment you notice, something begins to shift. Not dramatically, not enough to stop the action, but enough to create a fracture, a tiny one. The loop doesn't break instantly, but it falters, it flickers. You feel the dissonance between what you're doing and what you know you don't want to do anymore. And that discomfort, that tension, that is the seed of change. Because once you start recognizing the loop mid-motion, even if it's too late to stop it, you're no longer fully inside it. You're observing, watching yourself from the balcony of your mind, not judging, just noticing. And next time, that noticing happens earlier. Eventually, it moves from after to during, then during to before, and one day, it happens just in time. That's how the loop unravels. Not through willpower, not through shame, but through attention, through gentle, persistent awareness of the moments when you repeat without reason. Because there is a reason. It starts just older than you think. The loop is ancient. It's not from this week, this month, or even this life stage. It was written in early memory, in childhood, in patterns passed down, in emotional blueprints that never got updated. When you react without knowing why, it's not because there's no cause. It's because the cause is buried beneath years of habit and forgetfulness. The loop hides its origins so well, it convinces you the repetition is part of who you are. But it's not. It's something you learned, and anything learned can be unlearned. So what do you do when it happens again? Don't panic. Don't spiral. Don't berate yourself. Pause. Ask, what am I repeating right now? What does this feel like? Who else did I act this way with? When was the first time I remember this pattern? You don't need perfect answers. You just need the willingness to ask. Because every repetition is not a failure. It's an invitation. An invitation to watch yourself in motion. To notice the choreography of your inner world. To stand at the edge of the familiar and say, I see you now. And even if nothing changes today, something has already changed. Because the most powerful moment in any loop is not when you break it. It sets when you finally realize. It sets looping. You're living in what feels like the present. You're responding to what's in front of you, making choices, thinking thoughts, taking action. But if you pay attention, closer than you ever have, you might notice something strange. This moment doesn't feel alive. It feels rehearsed. Like you've been here before. Not just in a familiar place, but in a familiar posture, a familiar emotion, a familiar response. You're not reacting, you're performing. And not for anyone else, for yourself. For the version of you that learned long ago what this situation is supposed to feel like. That sips the trap of the rehearsed now. You're not in the present moment. You're in a memory wearing new clothes. You walk into a room and feel defensive, not because someone threatened you, but because in 100 rooms before this, you were hurt. So now, your body prepares. You rehearse the feeling before it arrives. You tighten before anyone even speaks. You're not experiencing now, you're anticipating it. It happens in relationships too. You say the thing you always say. You play the role you've always played. The supportive one, the angry one, the distant one, the fixer, the forgiver. You react not to what's said, but to what you expected them to say, before they said it. You're not listening. You're waiting to deliver your next line, because you've already lived this scene, or one just like it. The script is old. The words are muscle memory, and when it's over, you don't feel satisfied. You feel hollow, because you didn't respond. You reenacted. That's the terrifying thing about time loops. They don't always come with glitches or ghosts. Sometimes they just feel like routine. You wake up, make the coffee, scroll the same feed, feel the same envy, send the same message, go to the same job, avoid the same conversation, collapse into the same fatigue, and say, tomorrow I'll do it differently. But tomorrow arrives, and it feels like a copy-paste of today. Not because you stir not trying, because you stuck in the performance of now. You already decided how today would feel. Yesterday. Maybe even last year. You carry expectations into the moment like props. You walk onto the stage of your life, hit your mark, and recite the line you've whispered 100 times. I'm fine. It's whatever. I'm just tired. I knew this would happen. Do you see it? This isn't presence. This is prediction. And the worst part? You don't realize you're doing it. It's subtle. It's practiced. You call it being realistic, being prepared, being emotionally mature. But in truth, it's avoidance, not of pain, but of unpredictability. Because unpredictability is what breaks loops. When you're truly present, anything can happen. Your voice might shake, your beliefs might shift. You might say something real, something you haven't rehearsed. And that kind of vulnerability is terrifying to the part of you that wants control. So instead, you replay. You follow the script. And the loop lives on. But here's the crack in the cycle. You can feel when the performance begins. It's in the sigh before you speak, the tightening in your chest before you act, the sudden absence of curiosity, the moment when your mind says, I already know how this will go, and your body agrees. That sips when you sipped, no longer here. You're in the rehearsed version of here. And the only way out is risk. Real presence is a risk. It means stepping on stage without a script, letting the moment surprise you, asking a question you don't know the answer to, saying, I don't know what I feel yet, and meaning it, responding to what is, not what you assumed would be. You'll know when it happens, because everything will slow down. You'll feel uncertain, but alive. Your body will soften, your reactions will change shape, and you'll hear yourself say something you didn't expect. That's how you know you exited the loop, even just for a breath. Because the loop requires automation. But presence is improvised. This doesn't mean you have to abandon every routine or question every thought. It means watching yourself gently, noticing when your actions feel lived in versus when they feel alive, noticing when you're performing instead of participating. Ask yourself, am I responding to what's really happening, or to what I thought would happen? That single question can dissolve hours of rehearsed thought. Because the now is not a place you arrive. It's a place you notice, over and over. And each time you catch yourself drifting back into the script, you have a choice. Speak the next line, or pause, and improvise. So try this, right now. Look around. Feel the weight of your body. Ask yourself, what if this moment wasn't what I expected? What if I don't know what comes next? Let the answer be silence. Let the silence be your way out. Because as long as you're rehearsing, the loop survives. But the second you forget the script, you start to write a new one. Every action begins with a thought. At least, that's what you've always been told. But if you slow down, if you study the sequence closely, you'll realize that many of your actions don't begin at all. They continue. Like echoes. A gesture you make, a word you choose, a breath you hold. These don't always rise freshly from the present moment. They're often reverberations from earlier versions of you. Old decisions that still move your hands, still shape your voice, still direct your eyes without your permission. You think you stir acting, but you stir echoing. And that's how the loop hides, by disguising its inertia as initiative. You walk into a situation and immediately adopt a posture, not physically, but emotionally. Guarded, eager, distant. You don't choose it. It arrives pre-installed, maybe because of something that happened last week, or 10 years ago. But your body remembers. Your nervous system remembers. And it acts before you do. Have you ever walked into a room and instantly felt like a version of yourself you thought you'd outgrown? Less confident, more reactive, suddenly quieter or sharper than you were 5 minutes ago. It's not regression, it's repetition. An echo of who you were last time this setting, this dynamic, this tone occurred. Your actions carry history in their rhythm, even the smallest ones. You reach for your phone in a moment of stillness, not because you want to, but because that's what you've always done when silence arrives. You smile in a certain way during conflict, not to soothe the other person, but because that's what once kept you safe. You apologize before you've done anything wrong, not out of guilt, but because you were trained somewhere in the loop. That preemptive softness might protect you from abandonment. And all of it happens faster than thought. This is what makes the loop so resilient. It doesn't just live in ideas, it lives in reflexes, in instincts, in tiny decisions made just below the surface of awareness. And every time you follow the same cue with the same response, the echo deepens. The pattern grows more confident. It says, "Ah yes, we know how to survive this. Let's do it the old way. Not the best way, just the known way." And because it's familiar, you don't notice. You assume the action is yours, that you chose it. But if you trace the moment back far enough, you'll find the source, a memory, a fear, a belief whispered into your nervous system long ago. You think you set reacting now, but the moment was shaped before it arrived. And that's the haunting truth of this loop. It doesn't just make you think the same things, it makes you do the same things. Again and again, without the ceremony of awareness, without the music of intention. Action becomes echo. And the more unconscious it is, the more powerful it becomes. Because unconscious patterns don't ask questions. They don't check in. They don't update. They simply repeat, like ripples in a pool, long after the stone was thrown. But here sits the secret hiding in the echo. If you can trace it, you can interrupt it. You might not be able to stop a thought, or change a feeling, but you can pause before the action. You can catch the hand mid-reach, the sentence mid-breath, the apology mid-formation. And in that pause, you get to choose. Not always easily, not always confidently, but deliberately. And that's what breaks the spell. Let's take an example. You set about to respond to someone's sick's disappointment. Maybe it's sick to your partner, your parent, your boss, your child, and you feel it rising. The defensive explanation, the quick repair, the performance of "I sicked 'em fine." But you stop. You ask, have I said this before? Am I about to do what I always do? Is this action fresh, or is it an echo? That question alone doesn't change everything, but it changes the moment. It puts a crack in the surface, and sometimes a crack is enough. Enough for a breath to get through, enough for silence to widen, enough for you to hear something you never could when the loop was at full volume. You don't need to destroy your patterns in one day. You just need to notice the echo. Because once you hear it, it becomes less convincing. It loses its camouflage. And you stop mistaking repetition for truth. There will be days when you forget. When the echo feels louder than you. When you act before you can pause. That's okay. That's how loops work. Not as enemies, but as reminders. Each repetition is a mirror. This is still here. Do you want it to be? And each time you see the echo for what it is, not a choice but a carryover, you reclaim something. Not just your behavior, but your authorship. You remember that every moment is not a performance. It can be a composition, and you don't have to start from scratch. You just have to add one new note, one unexpected word, one shift in rhythm. Because the loop feeds on predictability. But you were never meant to be predictable. You were meant to wake up inside the pattern and say, I've heard this sound before, and this time I'll sing something else. It sneaks up on you in the smallest moments. You're pouring coffee, and the steam rises just right. You hear a sentence in passing, and your breath catches. You look at someone's face, or maybe your own reflection, and everything slows. A sensation floods your chest. I've lived this before. But you haven't set. Not exactly. You've never been here, in this version of time, in this specific body with this precise breath. So what is it? Déjà vu. A glitch in perception. A neurological anomaly. A mistake of memory. At least that sips what science says. But what if that sips just the surface? What if déjà vu isn't an error, but a message? A flare fired from the edge of the loop. A signal that says, hey, you're here again. Wake up. We've all felt it. That eerie flash of familiarity in a moment that should feel entirely new. That sinking vertigo of recognition. It's usually brief, gone before you can grasp it, but its emotional impact lingers far longer than it should. Why? Because deep down, something in you knows that this moment didn't arrive for the first time. It returned. You didn't experience it. You re-experienced it. Déjà vu might not be a problem of memory, but a symptom of pattern. A ripple in your mental timeline, alerting you that this, whatever this is, has already occurred. Maybe not in this body, maybe not in this lifetime, but somewhere inside the matrix of your consciousness, this scene has played before. Why? Because you're looping. Déjà vu isn't just a moment. It's a mirror held up by time itself. It reflects the invisible repetition that structures your life, not the obvious cycles like holidays or seasons, but the personal loops, the ones you don't even realize you're inside. The way you keep ending up in the same kinds of relationships. The same fears you thought you buried, resurrected in different disguises. The conversations that echo old arguments. New characters, same tension. The habits you swear you've grown out of, returning like background noise. And then comes the moment. You open a door, or hear a name, or stand in a certain slant of light, and your system jolts. You don't just remember the moment. You relive it. But it only lasts a heartbeat. Why? Because your mind can't afford to fully remember the loop. That would break the illusion of linear time, of novelty, of progress. So the déjà vu ends quickly. Your brain rewrites the sensation. Oh, just something weird with my memory, you tell yourself. And the loop breathes a sigh of relief. But what if, instead of brushing it away, you paused? What if you leaned into the sensation? Next time it hits, next time you feel that eerie recognition, try this. Don't sipt pull back. Don't explain it away. Just ask, where have I felt this before? Don't look for an exact scene. Look for a rhythm. Because that's what déjà vu really is. A rhythm. An emotional fingerprint. A recurring energetic tone that wraps itself around different details, but plays the same internal music. It sips not about the event. It sips about you. How you stay standing. What you set believing. What you set afraid of. What you steer about to do. Again. Because déjà vu is not always passive. Sometimes, it sits predictive. A warning that says, if you continue down this path, you will repeat what you promised to transcend. It sips the loop, tapping you on the shoulder, whispering, you've reached this fork before. Choose wisely this time. And maybe you don't sit. Maybe you make the same choice. The pattern continues. The script resumes. The loop tightens. But next time, when déjà vu comes again, you'll be closer. Closer to remembering that you have a choice. That the sensation isn't punishment. It's a portal. Because déjà vu isn't asking you to understand it. It's Dex asking you to notice it. To treat it not as a curiosity but as a cue. A cue that says, this is your moment of awareness. Step off the track. Do something different. Speak a different sentence. Think a different thought. Even a small variation changes the energy. Changes you. And the moment you change the way you respond to the familiar déjà vu evolves. It no longer arrives as a mysterious echo. It becomes a signpost, a nudge, a doorway. A reminder that time is not as fixed as you think. That repetition is not the enemy. It sips the map. And if you follow it far enough, you might reach the place the loop has always been leading you to. The edge of your old self. And the entrance to something unknown. It's there, beneath the noise, beneath the tasks, the conversations, the updates, the stress, the boredom, a rhythm, not loud, not musical, not something you hear with your ears, but something you feel, faintly, like a second heartbeat. The problem is, you don't notice it. Not because it sits not real, but because it sits too consistent. Like the hum of a refrigerator, like the ticking of a distant clock, it becomes background. You tune it out, not because you don't care, but because your brain is built to filter repetition. You've trained yourself to stop seeing what doesn't surprise you, and nothing is less surprising than your own patterns. But the rhythm is there, and it controls more than you think. It determines when you feel sad, not just why. It predicts when you start doubting yourself, not just what causes it. It sets the tempo of your frustration, the pacing of your burnout, the exact moment your motivation returns, only to fade on schedule. You think you stir, making independent decisions. But what if your life is following a song you didn't write? Not a song made of melodies, but of motions, repeated sequences, thought-action loops, emotional echoes that strike on a timeline so subtle, so precisely spaced, you'd only see it if you zoomed way, way out. This is the invisible rhythm, and it's been guiding your behavior for years. You wake up at the same hour, even without an alarm. You reach for your phone at the same minutes past the hour. You crave sugar at the same moment you did yesterday. You reach for the same self-doubt mid-conversation, right on cue. Your aha moments even come with suspicious regularity, as if pre-programmed into the week. You live by this rhythm, but you rarely question it, because questioning it would mean breaking the trance. And the trance is comfortable, predictable, safe. But it's also limiting, because when the rhythm goes unnoticed, it becomes a script. When it sits unchallenged, it becomes identity. You stop asking, is this what I want? And start saying, this is just who I am. But what if that sip's not true? What if who you are is buried beneath a rhythm you inherited, not chose? The loop hides in that rhythm. It survives because you follow the beat without asking who's drumming. It wraps itself in daily motions, in automatic responses, in moods that feel like weather but are actually rehearsed performances. And that sip's why it sits so hard to spot. Because nothing seems wrong. You're functioning, you're productive, you're doing everything you're supposed to do. And yet, something feels slightly off, like your life is happening to you, like you're a half-second late to every decision. That sip's the rhythm, keeping pace, carrying you, holding you just behind your own awareness. But once you start looking for it, once you really tune in, it starts to become obvious. The way you always feel a certain way at 9 p.m. The way your self-doubt rises like clockwork on Sunday nights. The way your energy surges on Wednesday mornings, then crashes at 3:15 p.m., like it's following a script. You call it coincidence, or habit, or your cycle. But what if it's not you? What if it sits the loop, replaying not because it has to, but because you've never paused long enough to hear the rhythm you're marching to? And here sits the most powerful thing. You can hear it. All it takes is attention. Try this tomorrow. Don't just move through your day. Watch it. Not like a participant, but like an observer. Track your emotions like you're watching weather roll through. Track your thoughts like you're listening to a soundtrack. Ask, what emotion always hits me at this hour? What thought keeps circling back, no matter the setting? What do I always crave? Food, comfort, control, at this exact point in the day? What sips the pattern beneath my random moods? You'll start to see it. The rhythm. The rise and fall. The repeating cycles. And when you see it, you don't have to fight it. You just have to interrupt it. Not with force, but with surprise. Say something you wouldn't normally say. Break a tiny routine. Walk a different route. Change the lighting in your room. Pause the action when you sipped, usually push through. Do something slightly unfamiliar. And in that unfamiliarity, the rhythm stumbles. The loop trips over itself. The repetition loses its grip, because the loop thrives on your blindness to it. But once it's seen, it can't pretend to be invisible anymore. That sips when you reclaim presence. Not just awareness of your thoughts, but awareness of the beat beneath them. Because once you notice the invisible rhythm, it's not invisible anymore. It's just background. Optional. A song you don't have to dance to unless you choose. And maybe for the first time, you choose silence. You choose stillness. You choose to wait before following the beat. And in that pause, the loop hears something it can echo. You. It looks fresh, doesn't it? This morning, this conversation, this emotion, even the news on your screen. It all feels like it's never happened before. The packaging is different. The details vary just enough to convince you that today is unique, that this choice is unprecedented, that this version of you is finally untouched by the past. But under the surface, time is wearing a mask. It seps pretending to be new, just like it did yesterday, and the day before that, and the year before that, when you swore things were about to change. It's not your fault. You were raised to believe time only moves forward, that progress is a line, that healing is linear, that growth means never returning to old patterns. But time, in your life, doesn't behave that way. It loops. It circles. It repeats in high resolution. And every time it returns, it does so with better makeup, a stronger disguise. It's the same feeling, just wearing different clothes. You enter a new relationship, and within weeks, the dynamic feels strangely familiar. You start a new project with energy, only to watch your motivation decay on the same predictable timeline. You face a decision that seems important, but somehow, you already know how it ends. Not because you've lived this exact scenario, but because time isn't giving you something new. It's giving you a remix. A highly convincing one. The people are new, the environment is new, but the emotion, the narrative, the inner choreography, exactly the same. Time doesn't set just flow. It rehearses. It dresses up old feelings in new events, and counts on you not noticing. It changes the setting, the lighting, even the sound design, but underneath, it's feeding you scenes from your own archive. Because time isn't interested in your novelty. It sits interested in your participation. And the easiest way to secure that participation? Pretend it's never happened before. This is why people make the same mistakes. Not out of ignorance, but out of disbelief. Disbelief that the thing they're choosing, this path, this person, this pattern, is actually an echo, not a revelation. You tell yourself, this time will be different. You want it to be different. You change your clothes, you read new books, you do the therapy, you try harder. But then the same arguments return, the same fears, the same stuckness, and you wonder why. Because time, when unexamined, defaults to its most familiar rhythm. And you follow along. Not because you stare weak, but because the loop is designed to feel new every time. It's crafted to mimic spontaneity, to convince you that you're evolving, when really, you're orbiting. So how do you spot it? How do you know when time is lying to you? Simple. You look for the feeling that betrays the illusion. Not the surface novelty, but the emotional déjà vu, that tightening in your chest when you meet someone and feel like you've already fought with them. That strange calm before a breakdown, because part of you remembers the breakdown is scheduled. That moment during a new experience when your body goes quiet and whispers, "Here we go again." That's not you being paranoid. That's you waking up. You don't need proof. You just need to trust the residue. Because new time doesn't leave a residue. Only loops do. So when you feel that subtle stickiness, like the moment is already worn in, like it already has a script, pay attention. Time is trying to re-enroll you in a scene you've already survived. But this time, you get to do something different. Not because you steer it stronger. Not because the loop is weaker. But because you see it. And what the loop fears most is being seen. Try this exercise when something feels new but slightly off. Too smooth, too scripted. Pause. Ask yourself, what's familiar about this moment that I'm pretending not to see? What decision is being disguised as new when it's actually repetitive? What emotion is being repackaged with a different storyline? If the answers feel uncomfortable, good, you're getting close. Because this is the truth. Most of what feels new in your life is just time reintroducing itself in costume. But here sits the gift hiding in the repetition. Each return gives you another chance. The loop might not be avoidable, but it is editable. Each time time pretends to be new, you can choose to pretend with it, or to expose it. To play along, or to pause. To respond the same way, or to surprise yourself. Even a subtle shift breaks the rhythm. One different word. One unexpected silence. One refusal to repeat the argument just because it feels automatic. That's all it takes to remind time that you are no longer its puppet. Because time can only pretend. But you can choose. And in that choice, the illusion starts to fall apart. Not instantly. Not forever. But enough to prove that the loop isn't unbreakable. It sits just well rehearsed. You wake up, and something feels off. The light is the same. The routine unfolds like it always does. Coffee, messages, silence. But beneath it all, there's a thin layer of unreality. Not enough to startle you. Just enough to unsettle. Like a word on the tip of your tongue, or a song you can't remember hearing. You felt it before, haven't you? Moments when reality moves with the softness of a dream. When objects seem too still, conversations echo strangely, and your own voice feels like someone else sips. You blink, shake it off, and keep moving. but a question lingers in the background of your awareness. Am I dreaming? Or is life just repeating so precisely it's become indistinguishable from a dream? That sips the haunting question. And it sips one the loop doesn't sit want you to ask. Because once you see it, really see it, you realize that many of your waking days don't feel lived. They feel rehearsed, like dream sequences, stitched together from memory and emotion, like pre-rendered environments you're walking through, again and again. This isn't set metaphor. It stims perception. Your brain, your body, your emotions, when trapped in repetition, begin to process time differently. You stop experiencing novelty and start recognizing patterns, and the more patterns you recognize, the more surreal your days become. Dreams and loops share a language, rhythm, echo, symbolism, compression. In dreams, time bends. Places change without warning. People shift identities. Conversations follow strange logic. But pause for a moment. Doesn't your waking life do this too? You forget why you entered the room. You speak to someone and feel like you've already had the exact exchange. You repeat the same mistake and feel like you watched yourself do it. Dream logic or loop logic? The answer might be both. Because when time repeats, it starts to feel less like a sequence and more like a simulation. Your brain, bored by the sameness, begins to detach. You zone out during conversations. You perform actions without memory of starting them. You finish entire meals without remembering the taste. These aren't symptoms of distraction. They stir signs of dreaming. Waking dreams, disguised as days. And deep down you know. You had days that felt like a fog. Not because you were tired, but because nothing new actually happened. You followed the same script, hit the same emotional beats and called it a day. But that wasn't a day. That was a loop. A loop so smooth, so uninterrupted, it became dreamlike. Dreams offer a hint. They often feel real while you're in them, and only after you wake do you realize their absurdity. But loops do the opposite. You live inside them, sense something is strange, and only later do you rationalize it away. You say, I was just tired. I've just been distracted lately. Time's been moving weird. But what if time isn't moving at all? What if it's simply pretending? You go to sleep, hoping the next day will bring something fresh. But when you wake, you pick up exactly where you left off. Same inner monologue, same resistance, same routine, even your random thoughts repeat. You call them dreams at night. But what are they during the day? Replays, fragments, flashbacks, loops. There's a name for this disconnection. Derealization. A sense that reality isn't quite real, that you're watching your life instead of living it. But what if that sensation isn't a psychological error? What if it's accurate? What if your mind knows, before your logic can admit it, that you're inside a pattern, that you're not experiencing linear time, but recursive time, that your life is just dream sequences stitched together by the illusion of variety? Here sips how to tell. Ask yourself, right now, did today feel vivid? Was anything truly unexpected? Or was it a remix of emotional tones I've already experienced, dressed in slightly new context? If the answer is the latter, you stir dreaming. Not in the REM sleep sense. In the loop sense. Living inside an echo chamber so convincing, even your reactions feel pre-recorded. And here's where it becomes eerie. Sometimes, the dream glitches. A moment feels too real. Someone says something unscripted. You pause. You hesitate. You look around and feel everything shift a half-inch out of sync. That sips the crack in the dream. The loop, noticing you noticed. You don't need to wake up in the spiritual sense. You just need to admit that you've been sleepwalking. And in that admission, something changes. You stop accepting the surreal as normal. You stop letting numbness pass as peace. You stop walking through your life like it's someone else's dream. Because the truth is, real life shouldn't feel like a dream. It should feel unpredictable, alive, risky, clumsy, full of pauses and contradictions and wonder. Dreams are too smooth. Loops are too familiar. Life, when lived fully, should be messy. So if things feel too rehearsed, shake them. Say something you never said. Pause before you respond. Walk a different path. Break one pattern, just one. It might not break the loop completely, but it might startle the dream. And in that moment of confusion, You might feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Awake. You take a step forward. The floor is solid, the air is familiar, your destination is clear, or so it seems. But something deep in your body whispers otherwise. It sips not fear, it sips not anxiety. It sips recognition, a quiet certainty rising in your chest. You've walked this already. Not literally. The hallway may be new, the people different, the outfit changed, but the feeling, the pacing, the emotional weight, the timing of your thoughts, it all rings with eerie precision. You've said these words. You've made this choice. You've watched this moment unfold before. And you wonder, is it memory or is it motion? Because sometimes movement doesn't mean progress. Sometimes it's just performance, a loop dressed as momentum, and you, the protagonist, mistaking action for direction. That sips what the loop does best. It convinces you that walking forward is different than walking in circles. It offers novelty and scenery, while keeping the core of your experience unchanged. And because you see change on the surface, new job, new relationship, new city, you assume something has shifted. But you know better. The internal map hasn't changed. The streets may be paved differently, but you're still walking the same route, the same emotional destinations, the same relational traps, the same late-night thoughts that visit like old friends wearing different names. You've walked this already, and you're beginning to feel it, not just intellectually but somatically. Your body hesitates in moments it should glide through. Your chest tightens before you speak. Not from fear, but from familiarity. Your breath holds, as if bracing for an outcome it already knows. The script is playing, and you are both actor and audience. So why do we keep walking? Because loops feel safer than the unknown. Predictability soothes the nervous system. The mind prefers the ache it understands to the freedom it doesn't trust. Even if the pain is familiar, it's at least familiar. And so, you walk paths that were never meant to be lifelong, but have become permanent through repetition. And here's the most disorienting part. Others don't notice. Because everyone is walking their own loops. And when everyone is looping, no one looks strange. You might try to break free. You read something that shakes you awake. You make a change. You speak a truth. And for a while, everything feels fresh. But then, without realizing it, you're back. Back in the same mental space, same conflict, same outcome. And you whisper to yourself, how did I get here again? That question isn't set rhetorical. It sets a compass. It points to the loop. It points to the moments you made unconscious choices. Choices that felt small but carried the full weight of your past. The way you didn't speak up. The way you overcompensated. The way you swallowed truth to keep peace. Again, these are not failures. They sip to echoes. You're retracing your steps through a pattern designed not to trap you, but to reveal you. Because you can only recognize the loop once you've walked it enough times to memorize its shape. And you start beginning to do that now. You notice the cues, the sequence, the emotional build, the way you shrink when a certain tone is used, the way you anticipate abandonment before it happens, the way you start pre-writing someone's reaction in your head before they speak. That sips the map revealing itself. That sips the loop, becoming visible. And once it sits visible, it sits vulnerable. Because awareness is erosion. It wears away the illusion. It loosens the grip. The loop can only survive if you keep believing this path is new. But now, you don't set. Now you pause. You pause before saying I'm fine when you're not. You pause before apologizing for things you didn't do. You pause before rationalizing someone's behavior that hurts. You pause before continuing the walk. And in that pause, you do something revolutionary. You stop pretending this is the first time. You look around at your internal landscape, the thoughts, the postures, the emotional predictions, and you say, I've seen this before, not with bitterness, not with panic, but with calm recognition. And in that moment, the path trembles. Because the loop can't carry you forward once you stop believing it's a road. It sumps not a road, it sumps a track, a treadmill built from memory. And your job is not to sprint faster, it's to step off. Not to avoid discomfort, but to face it directly, to stop seeking novelty and repetition, to stop mistaking movement for growth. Because walking the same path 100 times doesn't make it your destiny. It just means you haven't turned. And the turn doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it sits a breath. Sometimes it sips a new sentence. Sometimes it's asking, what would I do right now if I wasn't afraid of doing it wrong again? The answer might terrify you. It might liberate you. Either way, it sets not part of the loop. It sits a new step. And with that, you're no longer walking where you've already been. You're walking towards something you've never seen. Even if it sists just the next breath. A stillness. There's a moment before every familiar mistake where something strange happens. A pause that doesn't feel like hesitation. It feels like déjà vu with no memory. You stand at the edge of a choice, and before you can think it through, before you can even process what's happening, you're already acting. Not spontaneous. And it steps not new. Not reactive. It steps scripted. You don't notice the script right away. It doesn't speak in full paragraphs or dramatic commands. It's more subtle than that. A tilt of your head. A shrug. A tone in your voice you've heard before, but can't place. The exact words you swore you'd never say again, emerging without invitation. That sips how the loop keeps going. It doesn't scream. It just slides the script into your hands while you're not looking. It doesn't push. But you said them before. And because the lines feel like your own voice, because they echo the shape of your fears, your memories, your habits, you speak them without question. Not just last week. Not just in childhood. You've said them in countless situations, to different people, across different versions of yourself. And each time, the script promised it would be different, that this time, it would finally land right. But it never does. Because the script isn't written for resolution. It's written for repetition. And you stir not the author. You tell yourself you're improvising, that your reactions are fresh, that your perspective is new. But deep beneath those beliefs lies the hidden mechanism, a pattern of cues and responses that play out like muscle memory. You stir the actor. Here sits how you can tell. You hear yourself offering comfort you don't believe. You find yourself mid-conversation, wondering why your words sound so tired. You rehearse an argument in your head hours before it happens, and then deliver it, word for word. You anticipate rejection, and preemptively soften your truth. You laugh too early, too loudly, not because something is funny, but because that's the expected line. And when it sips over, you feel it. The hollowness of repetition. The ache of a performance you didn't realize you were in. The sense that something moved through you, not something alive, but something remembered. That sips the script. And it always reappears quietly. It slides beneath awareness, and moves your body for you. It carries the weight of old beliefs, past identities, unresolved feelings, and every time it returns, it comes a little smoother, a little easier to follow, a little harder to detect, until one day you don't even realize you're reading it. Without title, without credits, without permission. You just think, this is who I am. But you are not the script. You are the one watching it unfold. And the moment you begin to see it, not as truth, not as instinct, but as a constructed loop, that's when the edges of the illusion begin to fray. You ask questions you never asked before. Why do I always say this when I am hurt? Who taught me to apologize like this, before I've even done anything wrong? Why do I default to silence when I am scared? Who is this voice that speaks before I think? Long enough to see that your reaction was not inevitable, that the conversation could have gone differently, that you could have paused, breathed, waited. And when you ask those questions, you break character. Just for a moment. But instead, the script reappeared. And you followed it. Not because you said a weak. Not because you are broken. It doesn't still need to control your life. But because that sips what the loop depends on. And you, being tired, being vulnerable, being human, fall back into rhythm. It just needs to remind you of your lines. It's okay. You stir not alone. Everyone has a script. Most never see it. Some begin to suspect it. And a few begin to rewrite it. That sips what you sit doing now. Because recognition is the beginning of authorship. You can't burn the script. You can't erase it. But you can question it. You can pause midline and ask, is this true? Do I still believe this? Am I saying this because it's mine, or because it's memorized? And if you don't speak at all, if you simply wait, the silence might show you a new way. The loop hates silence. Because silence is where real choice lives. That space, between the trigger and the response, is the only place the loop can't touch. It's not part of the script. It's outside the stage. It's you, raw, awake, unscripted. And it doesn't always feel good. Sometimes, it feels terrifying. To not know what to say next. To not default to the lines that have kept you safe. But that fear? That's the sound of freedom arriving. You don't have to be convincing. You don't have to be perfect. You don't even have to get it right the first time. You just have to notice. Because once you do, the script loses its power. And when it tries to reappear, softly, quietly, predictably, you still recognize it for what it is. Not your voice. Not your truth. Just an old role, begging for one more scene. You let it fall. But this time, you don't pick it up, and walk off stage. You think your life is moving forward. That each day is a step toward something new. That growth means you left the past behind. But what if that past isn't set behind you at all? What if it's hiding just beneath the surface, playing on loop? A hidden replay. Not visible, not loud, but deeply embedded in the background of your every thought, every habit, every feeling of I have been here before. This isn't a metaphor. It's a mechanism. You wake up, go through your day, engage in conversations, make decisions, believing they're yours, believing you're the one steering. But in truth, most of it has already happened. Not in the outer world, but in your inner programming, in the pathways carved by repetition, in the grooves worn by years of emotional reflex. The scene looks new, but the script is familiar. The emotion is recycled. The reaction is automatic. And before you've had a chance to realize what's happening, the replay is complete. Different names. Different rooms. Same pattern. It's subtle. So subtle, you almost never catch it. But it's there. You talk to someone and feel tension, not because of what they said, but because they remind you of someone else. Someone who hurt you. Someone you forgave too quickly. Someone you never confronted. And without meaning to, you respond to this person, as if they were that one. Replay. You find yourself in a moment of choice. Do you speak honestly, or stay quiet? And you feel the pull of old silence. The memory of a time when your voice caused rejection. So you swallow your truth. Again. Replay. You celebrate something good, but right after, a wave of guilt or fear crashes in. You remember what happened the last time you felt joy, how it slipped away, how it hurt more than it healed. So you brace, you disconnect, you dull your excitement to avoid disappointment. Replay. It's not just memory, it's motion. You are being moved again and again by echoes of experiences that never fully processed, that never got completed. And so they circle, looking for a new scene to attach to, a new stage to reenact themselves on. Your life becomes a theater for your unhealed past. But the audience is just you. Watching. Forgetting. Watching again. The loop doesn't care about time. It cares about resonance. The replay continues until you respond differently. Not just externally, but internally. Until you notice what is really happening. Because most of the time, you don't you tell yourself, this is just how I am. This always happens to me. I guess I attract the same type of people. Maybe I not meant to be happy. But those aren't truths. They signs. Signs that the replay is still running. Still controlling the narrative. And what worse? It gets reinforced every time you go unconscious. The more often you act without reflection, the stronger the replay becomes. Like a song stuck on repeat that embeds itself in your muscle memory. Soon, you don't just think it, you become it. Your identity wraps around your patterns. Your self-worth shrinks to fit your past. Your choices bend toward familiar outcomes, just to stay in rhythm. And you wonder why nothing feels real. Why joy feels temporary. Why sadness arrives too quickly. Why growth feels like fiction. Because the loop isn't broken. It's just hiding. Hiding in the good days. The productive weeks. The surface level peace. You think you've moved on, but you've only paused the playback. Until something presses play. A breakup. A promotion. A random Tuesday. And suddenly, the old storyline floods back in. Like it never left. Because it never did. But here's the part. No one tells you the replay isn't here to punish you. It's dips here to complete itself. It wants closure, integration, rewriting. It wants you to stop sleepwalking through the same emotional beats, to stop calling your loop a life, to stop mistaking your scars for your compass, and to start seeing, to see the moments that are recycled, to see the way you position yourself in conversations, to see how often you anticipate pain before it even knocks. Because once you see it, the spell begins to break. The replay weakens when watched. It thrives on your forgetting. It depends on your autopilot. So watch. Not obsessively, not with paranoia, just with gentleness, curiosity. Ask, what part of this feels familiar? What old version of me is being reenacted right now? Am I responding to the present, or to the memory beneath it? And most importantly, can I respond differently, even slightly? Because that's all it takes to disrupt the pattern. A pause, a new word, a deeper breath, a refusal to follow the usual emotional script. The replay might still try to continue, but it will falter, it will stumble, it will lose its rhythm, and in that gap, you find freedom. You remember that you said not your past, you stir not your patterns, you stir not the replay, you stir the one who can turn it off, or rewrite it, or walk away. Even if you walked this before, a similar failure, you thought you learned from it, you thought it was over, that you'd done the work, absorbed the lesson, paid the price. But here it comes again, just under a new disguise. A similar hurt. A different time, same ache. You tell yourself, I've already made this mistake. And yet, here you are, living its echo. Not because you stir careless, not because you cert cursed, but because mistakes don't always end when you correct them. Some mistakes don't set loop backward. They loop forward. They disguise themselves as progress, as a new chapter, as something better this time. But if you look closely, really closely, you'll see the signature, the fingerprints, the familiar detour, the part of yourself that says, something about this feels like before. This is the hidden mechanism of the loop. The mistake returns, not to shame you, but to finish what it started. Because mistakes don't only teach. They repeat. Especially the ones you buried under the name, experience and pretended were over. Especially the ones you didn't stare to really look at. Some mistakes come back wearing smiles. A job offer that seems like redemption, but carries the same burnout you once promised yourself you'd never allow. A relationship that starts in comfort, but hums with the same tension that once tore you apart. A plan you pour your energy into, only to find yourself back at the same wall, feeling the same emptiness. You say, this is different. But is it? Or is it the loop using a new setting, a new timeline, just enough change to keep you invested, while dragging the same mistake through the years, unresolved? It steps a seed. The mistake is instead a failure. And if it doesn't grow into wisdom, it grows into repetition. You don't even need to believe in fate or karma to see this. You just need to observe your life with brutal honesty. What choices do I keep making that look new, but end the same? What part of me still feels obligated to relive what I thought I outgrew? What am I calling bad luck, that might actually be a pattern? Sometimes the loop doesn't punish you with the same outcome. Sometimes it punishes you with almost getting it right. You come this close to breaking free. You almost speak the truth. You almost leave the thing that sits killing you. You almost choose rest instead of proving your worth again. But you don't sit. And the mistake loops forward. Not immediately. Not loudly. But it sits not something else. And you stir back where you started. Only now you call it something else. Just quietly enough that by the time you recognize it, the scene has already replayed. It accepts the mistake, returning for a sequel. It only cares how unconscious you still are. The loop doesn't care how smart you become. If you don't pause, if you don't interrogate the pattern, it will use your very growth to reinforce the mistake. It will tell you you've changed, while pulling you through the same architecture of disappointment, just with better furniture. Why they exit one relationship, and find themselves replaying the same pain with someone who seemed different. This is why people leave toxic jobs, and end up in the same role under a new title. Why the lesson always feels almost integrated, until it doesn't. Because the mistake never disappeared. It just moved forward. It looped itself into the future and waited for you there. So what do you do when you notice? Not when it's too late, but when it's just early enough to catch the scent of repetition. When your body tightens in a scene that seems familiar. When your gut says, we've been here before. You don't set panic. You don't set run. You pause. You don't sit collapse into guilt. You pause long enough to observe the moment not as you but as a pattern. You say, this is a fork. But what if I didn't stet? This is where I usually. You respond instead of react. And in that pause, you do the rarest thing in the world. That sips how the mistake loses its grip. But when you stop playing the part it expects. Not when you finally get it right. Because mistakes aren't sit here to ruin you. They sep here to reveal you. And if they keep returning, it's not because you're doomed. It's because there's something you keep forgetting to reclaim. Your boundaries. Your ability to say no without guilt. Your voice. Your right to choose the unfamiliar over the predictable. Your willingness to sit in discomfort rather than repeat convenience. Most people don't fail because they weak. They fail because the loop makes the mistake feel like home. But now, you know better. You see the blueprint. You recognize the echo. And that changes everything. Even if the mistake comes again, you're not the same. Even if the loop tempts you with the same old path, you have a new question. And in that question, the pattern hesitates. What would I do if I didn't assume this was the only way? Because mistakes can only loop forward if you walk forward blindly. The loop stutters. The script flickers. You stir walking with your eyes open now. But you? It wears today Sip's clothes. Speaks with today Sip's voice. Smells like fresh air and possibility. But underneath, it's something older. Something familiar. Something that already happened. That Sip's how the past returns. Not as memory, but as presence. Dressed up as now. You're having a conversation, and something small triggers you. A tone, a look, a phrase. It's subtle, almost forgettable. But your body reacts instantly. Your shoulders tense, your stomach drops, your breath shortens. You don't know why. It doesn't make sense. Everything is fine. But it isn't it. Because the past is in the room now. Not as a flashback, but as context. You think you stir responding to this moment. But you stir not. You stir responding to what it reminds you of. And because it doesn't look like the past, you don't recognize it. You tell yourself you spurred over it. You Sip healed. You Stev moved on. But have you? Or have you just stopped calling it what it is? Because the past doesn't always return with photographs and nostalgia. Sometimes, it returns as a decision. A hesitation. A reaction that belongs to a different time. You find yourself saying yes when you meant no, not because you're unsure, but because the last time you said no, it cost you something. You soften your voice in a debate, not because you're calm, but because the last time you were loud, someone left. You call this maturity, growth, decency. But what if it sits just memory in disguise? What if your emotional instincts are time travelers, pulling history into every room you enter? That Sip's the loop Sip's greatest magic trick. It doesn't need to repeat the event. It just needs to repeat the feeling. And if the feeling is the same, it doesn't matter how different the moment looks. You still living the past. But there Sep's more. Sometimes, you're not just replaying your own past. Sometimes, you stir reliving someone else's sets. Patterns passed down, generational beliefs, inherited shame. Behavior modeled so many times that it slipped into your nervous system before you could say no. You don't even realize it. You're reacting to a situation in a way that isn't you. Not truly. But it feels natural, because it's always been there. It stips what you saw, what you survived, what you were told. And now it wears the mask of your present. But the present doesn't feel like this, does it? It doesn't carry this much dread. It doesn't feel like a performance. It doesn't echo with emotional déjà vu. That echo, that weight is the giveaway. You stir not in the present. You're in the past, reenacting itself with better lighting. It happens in relationships all the time. You love someone, and then suddenly, your old abandonment wounds rise. You project fears onto them, not because of anything they've done, but because of someone who came before them. And now, You're reacting to a ghost, defending yourself against a threat that's not actually here. Or maybe you sabotage something good. Not because you don't just want it, but because it reminds you too much of what you lost. And if you end it first, maybe it won't hurt the same. That SIP's not the present. That SIP's protection, built by the past. You think you sit choosing, but you set rehearsing. You think you steer responding to the moment, but you're responding to what the moment reminds you of. The loop doesn't just trap you in what happened. It makes you believe that what happened is still happening. So how do you tell the difference? How do you know when the past is dressing up in the costume of the now? Watch for exaggeration, overreactions, undue emotional weight, moments that should be light but feel heavy, words that trigger more than they logically should, decisions that feel inevitable, even though you still technically have a choice. Those are the signs. And once you notice them, you get to ask the most important question of all. What year is this? Emotionally? Because if you're honest, a lot of your decisions aren't being made by the current you. They sit being made by the 10-year-old you, the 17-year-old you, the 25-year-old you who trusted the wrong person, the version of you who still thinks they're stuck in a moment they survived, but never understood. But you stir not in that moment anymore. You just haven't updated the file. Your body, your mind, they're still running old code. And until you rewrite it, the loop will continue. Not out of malice, out of loyalty. Your nervous system remembers what hurt, and it's doing everything it can to keep you safe. But safety isn't always freedom, and protection isn't always presence. So what do? You pause. You breathe. You ask, is this mine? Is this now? And if the answer is no, you thank the past for trying to help. And then you choose the present anyway. Even if it's scary. Even if it sips messy. Even if it doesn't come with a script. Because the present, when it's real, feels uncertain. But it also feels alive. And that sips the difference. The loop wants you certain. Safe. Predictable. But life wants you awake. So when the past shows up dressed as the present, look it in the eye. And remind it gently. You don't live here anymore. There is a moment, quiet, fleeting, barely noticeable, where everything could be different. Not because the world changes, not because the past disappears, but because you notice. You see the spiral for what it is. The repetition, the emotional gravity, the choices that feel like habits pretending to be instincts. You don't even need to act yet. You just need to become aware. And that alone is enough to break the loop. It's strange, isn't it? How awareness seems so small, just a shift in perception, a flicker of clarity, yet it changes everything beneath the surface, like light hitting a spinning top and revealing it's not floating but trembling. The spiral wants motion. It feeds on momentum, on you reacting quickly, predictably, unconsciously. Awareness interrupts that. It pauses time, not literally, but psychologically. It inserts a wedge between stimulus and response, between urge and action, between history and now. And in that wedge, freedom breathes. You might not even realize you've been spiraling, because spirals don't feel like circles. They feel like progress, until they don't sit. They feel like this time is different, until you hit the same wall. The spiral often starts with thought, a fear you didn't question, a belief you inherited, a memory disguised as motivation, and it pulls you inward, into reaction, into habit, into emotion that deepens instead of resolves. You try to think your way out of it. You analyze. You justify. You spiral more. But then, something odd happens. You catch yourself. Maybe in the mirror. Maybe in the middle of a sentence. Maybe when someone else mirrors your pattern back to you without meaning to. And you think, wait, haven't I been here before? That SIP's not just reflection. That SIP's awareness. And awareness doesn't fix everything. It doesn't erase pain. It doesn't remove consequence. But it halts the spiral. Because the spiral SIP's power is its invisibility. And awareness is light. You see the loop as a loop. Not as truth. Not as fate. Just as repetition. That alone softens the edges. You don't yell at yourself anymore for spiraling. You don't sit to pretend it sits random. You witness. And witnessing changes your relationship to it. The loop says, react. Awareness says, observe. The loop says, you always do this. Awareness says, you're doing it again. That's okay. What now? This what now is the key. Because awareness doesn't demand perfection. It doesn't ask you to immediately change course. It just invites you to stop sleepwalking. To stop rehearsing survival. To stop pretending your past knows more than your present. It's like waking up mid-dream and realizing, I can choose a different ending. Not by force. Not by shame. But by noticing. And that noticing, that single breath of clarity, is where the spiral begins to weaken. Think of the spiral like a storm. Strong winds of habit and emotion and belief swirling faster the more you resist. Most people try to escape it by outrunning it. They distract. They numb. They perform. But the storm chases them. Why? Because they haven't said he's seen it. They said only felt it. Feeling without awareness feeds fear. Awareness turns fear into data. You begin to map the spiral. You see what triggers it. Where it begins. What thoughts give it fuel. What silence deepens its pull. And suddenly, you set and not inside it anymore. You stir beside it. You stir watching your mind loop. You're watching your heart repeat a rhythm you thought was new. And you begin to choose. You still feel the pull. You still hear the echo. But you no longer confuse the spiral with your identity. You say, this is a pattern, not a person. You say, I am here now. I wasn't sit before. And that presence, that sacred grounded awareness, changes everything. Even if you still fall into the spiral later, it won't have the same hold. Because part of you now lives outside it. Watching. Waiting. Ready. Over time, the awareness grows. You feel it earlier. Not at rock bottom, but at the start. Not after the damage, but before the decision. You catch the first thought. You question the first assumption. You breathe before you speak. You pause before you repeat. And the spiral stutters. Its rhythm breaks. Its gravity weakens. Because it cannot survive being seen. That sips the secret the loop doesn't want you to know. It thrives on sleep. It lives in the automatic. But you stir awake now. You stir not perfect. You don't need to be. Awareness isn't about always choosing right. It sips about knowing you can. That alone shifts your life. From pattern to presence. From rehearsal to reality. From spiral to stillness. And in that stillness, the loop finally pauses. Not because it sits gone, but because you are here, truly, fully here. And nothing repeats in the same way again. Not when it sits seen. Not when it sets named. Not when you are the one witnessing it from the center. Welcome back. You brush it off. Call it déjà vu. Call it insecurity. But it isn't either of those things. It's recognition. It's the whisper that this has all happened before. Because it has. And you didn't notice it the last time. It always starts the same way. Feeling like you're getting somewhere. Like the path is finally unfolding. And things are clicking into place. Your mind congratulates you for breaking the cycle. For evolving. For shedding an old skin. But deep down you hesitate. Something feels too familiar. Progress isn't always forward. That's the lie the loop tells you. It drapes itself in momentum. In checklists. In productivity. You do more. Accomplish more. Become more. Only to realize you're walking the same hallway again. Just with new wallpaper. The loop doesn't just trap you in failure. Sometimes it traps you in success. And that's far more dangerous. Because when the loop rewards you, it reinforces the illusion of growth. You can climb higher and still be spinning. You can be celebrated for escaping while secretly circling the same drain. It's hard to spot because it's dressed in evolution. You change your habits. You change your appearance. You change the people around you. And yet the same thoughts return. The same fears wear new names. The same endings reappear with different actors. The world tells you to move on. But what if moving on is part of the loop? What if it's another disguise? Another way time repeats itself under the mask of motion? We are often like that. Mistaking movement for change. Mistaking transformation for liberation. But freedom doesn't come from doing something new. It comes from seeing something clearly. And here's the hard truth. Most of the time, we don't want to see clearly. We want to believe we've grown. We want our pain to mean something. We want our past to be a staircase, not a carousel. So we pretend the new chapter is a different book, even when it's the same sentence repeating itself with better punctuation. Consider this: a snake eats its own tail, not because it's hungry, but because it's confused. It believes it's advancing when it's only consuming itself. You fall in love again, and the wounds resurface in different shapes. You move to a new place, and loneliness follows like a faithful ghost. You start a new job, and the same insecurities rise up, just wearing new clothes. You begin healing, only to build new cages inside the therapy room. That's the brilliance of the loop. It adapts. It evolves as you evolve. It doesn't want you stagnant. It wants you looping so efficiently that you no longer notice the loop at all. It wants you to perfect the pattern. And yet, you post the progress. You tell the story. You convince even yourself. So how do you notice it? That eerie familiarity in new beginnings. The signs are subtle. That feeling of running without arriving. That restlessness even in success. That pattern of making different choices that still lead to the same pain. You notice it when progress feels suspiciously comfortable. When your growth never really asks you to confront anything sacred. When your reflection is dressed differently, but speaks the same scripts. You pause. You stop celebrating every milestone. And then, something happens. What if this ladder just leads back to the floor? I thought I escaped. What if this is a more sophisticated loop? You start questioning them instead. It means your definition of progress is evolving. It doesn't mean your progress is fake. True growth doesn't always feel like forward motion. Sometimes it feels like stopping. Like turning around and staring at the part of yourself you always skipped. The part that didn't get healed, it just got hidden. The part that didn't evolve, it just found better ways to pretend. And when you turn to face that, really face it, something cracks. The part that didn't get wiser, it just got busier. But quietly. Not loudly, not dramatically. The same quiet you ignored when the loop first began. Not an answer. And in that quiet, you hear something new. But a mirror. And in that mirror, you finally see what time has been trying to show you. That progress, when disconnected from awareness, is just repetition with better PR. That time isn't set moving you forward. You are moving within time, drawing circles, painting spirals, mistaking patterns for paths. Until now. Until the moment you stop asking, am I doing better? That shift rewrites the entire journey. And start asking, am I doing this again? You stop climbing and start seeing. You stop sprinting and start listening. You stop forcing the new and begin forgiving the old. And maybe, just maybe, that's what real progress looks like. But noticing the track, not running faster, not escaping the pattern, not pretending the loop is a ladder, but naming it, but stepping off it entirely. You one sit, always be sure. Sometimes, it will still feel like forward. Sometimes, the loop will still win. Because now, you sit are aware. And that sit's okay. And awareness, the kind that sees through the costume of progress, is enough to interrupt the illusion. It sits enough to sit still while the world spins around you and say, I sit's been here before, but I don't have to walk it again. And in that pause, time hesitates with you. And maybe, that sit's where real change begins. It begins with a flicker. Not in the sky, not on your screen, but in your mind. A moment you can't place, yet one that feels too vivid to ignore. You walk into a room, you hear someone laugh, you glance at a clock, and suddenly, something stirs inside you. Haven't it? I've been here before. Not just with these people, but not just in this space. Used to have lived this exact feeling, this breath, this beat, and it isn't set memory. It's set something older, more circular, more haunting. It steps not déjà vu. Time blinks, and your consciousness follows a thread you didn't know was still dangling. Not exactly. You've seen this before. This is a mirror. Déjà vu is a hiccup, because you never stopped seeing it. It loops, because time, in its deepest secrets, does not move forward, and waits. It waits for you to wake up, and loops. To finally ask the question that shatters the illusion. To notice the pattern beneath your assumptions. Why does this feel like it already happened, even though I'm here for the first time? It seeps in the mechanism. You live a life of layers. The answer isn't sit in the moment. Routines that dress up in new colors. Experiences that pretend to surprise you but don't. Emotions that masquerade as novelty. You change your job. You change your city. You change your relationships. Time waits behind the curtain. But time, replaying what you refuse to face. It steps a reflection of you. The loop is not just a trick of time. Your decisions. Your reactions. Your unspoken narratives. They repeat, not because you sit accursed, but because you set are unconscious. It steps patient. And the loop? It doesn't rush. It doesn't punish. It simply reflects. Again. And again. And again. Until you finally see yourself. The familiarity becomes a clue, not a glitch. And when you do, everything changes. The mirror becomes a window. The repetition becomes a message, not a punishment. But here sits the catch. Because if you admit that you've seen this before, most people don't want to see the loop. You have to admit that you brought yourself back here. Not the universe conspiring against you. Not chance. Not fate. You. Your fear of standing still. Your craving for closure. Your reluctance to change the one variable that matters. Your awareness. Because when you're not aware, you keep acting out the same script. Even when the actors change. You enter a new phase of life, but feel the same emptiness. You date a different person, but the dynamic is identical. And then you wonder why progress feels like parody. Why endings feel suspiciously like introductions. You chase new goals, but the hunger never quiets. Why every breakthrough has the aftertaste of almost. It sips because the loop doesn't need your permission to repeat. Only your ignorance. And it thrives in moments you dismiss. The careless goodbye. The flash of anger. The hesitation to speak. Each one is a pixel in the larger pattern. The silence you label as just tired. Each one asks the same question. Are you paying attention yet? But here sits the strange mercy of the loop. You can ignore it for years. It never gives up on you. You can cover it with distractions, accomplishments, even healing. But it will be there. Waiting at the edge of awareness. Staring back through every mirrored moment. How do I know the difference between real change and the loop's disguise? You may wonder. The answer is disorienting. Because real change doesn't always feel good. It disrupts your comfort. It feels unfamiliar. Because the loop feels like déjà vu dressed as destiny. It rewrites your identity. And that sips how you know it sips, not the loop. It feels like vulnerability, not repetition. Real change feels like being lost in a forest. Without a map that you yourself have drawn 100 times. Like truth, not reassurance. It feels like surrender. Like chaos, not rhythm. Because it means stepping out of the loop. And outside the loop is the unknown. But surrender is terrifying. It steps familiar, even when it breaks you. The loop is predictable, even when it hurts. That's why so many people choose it. They choose the lover who feels like home, even when home was never safe. But ritually, not consciously. They choose the pattern that numbs them, because pain with a script is easier than joy without a plan. But you've seen this before. You didn't look away. Haven't set you. And this time, even if you still repeating, that matters. Even if you're still caught in the spiral. Naming is a form of alchemy. Noticing is a rebellion. And you did that. You said, I've seen this before. Not as complaint, but as realization. And that awareness, small as it feels, is the crack in the mirror. It seps the you that steps outside of the loop and whispers. It sips the breath that breaks the rhythm. Time was stuck in you. Because you were never stuck in time. I don't need to live this again just because I already lived it. It's watching. And now, waiting. Wondering if you'll notice this moment too. You'll see it not as another repetition. Because if you do, but as the first step out, time doesn't whisper, it stares. It doesn't blink, it watches. And it watches you, not in punishment, but in patience. Because time has all the time in the world to wait for you to notice. The way you brush your teeth, always starting from the same side. It hides in your smallest rituals. The way you check your phone at stoplights, always swiping to the same app. The way your mind drifts to the same person at the same hour. The way regret tastes the same, no matter how the recipe changes. But sometimes, the choices are making you. Or worse, replaying you. You think you sit making choices, because this isn't the first time you've reached this moment. And that sip's where the pattern reveals itself. It's the first time you're aware that it isn't the first. The sense of knowing. But in the feelings that return, not in the facts. You see it now in the way conversations loop, not just with others, but with yourself. The reflex of emotion. The echo of thought. How your doubts dress differently, but speak in the same voice. How the ache you thought was buried shows up again, like it never left, only waited. Time stares back when you start asking, because time's pattern isn't made of numbers or hours. And when you dare to answer, the illusion begins to tremble. Why does this moment feel pre-written? It's sets made of you, your repetitions, your projections. You run toward new love, but feel old heartbreak. Your forgotten dreams folded into present fears. You chase novelty, but find familiarity. Time isn't set looping, you are. You build a future, and the past moves in before you finish the walls. And time just holds the mirror. It doesn't force you to change. It invites you to see. To admit you're in a pattern is to admit you've played a part. And seeing is dangerous, not because it hurts, but because it holds you accountable. That your suffering wasn't always inflicted. Sometimes, it was rehearsed. That your loneliness wasn't just bad luck. Sometimes, it was selection. It exists to wake you. The pattern doesn't exist to punish you. Every heartbreak, every failure, every false start, they're not random. Markers. They sitter coordinates. Signals. You just had to stop eating them and start following them. Time has been leaving you breadcrumbs in the shape of repetition. So how do you know when time is staring? It sips when the story starts to feel self-aware. When the plot thickens not with drama, but with déjà vu. When you begin to feel like your own life is a parable written by someone trying to teach you something. When the people in your life stop being strangers and start being symbols. And maybe it is. Because patterns aren't set just about behavior. They sitter about attention. They sitter about meaning. They're about energy returning to where it wasn't finished. You didn't just end that relationship. You paused the lesson. You postponed the reckoning. You didn't just quit that job. You didn't just escape that version of yourself. You delayed the confrontation. It just replays it. But time doesn't forget what you delay. Until you notice. Until you sat you're ready. And now, finally, you settle looking back. That sips the strange magic of awareness. It doesn't stop the loop. And time is looking with you. It slows it. It lets you choose. It softens it. But now, you don't walk it blind. You walk it awake. The pattern might still be there. You feel the urge to run and say, this time, I still stay. You feel the familiar ache and say, I know this. I don't need to follow it again. You feel the pull to repeat and whisper, not this time. And in those whispers, time listens. It sits here to be transcended. Because the pattern isn't set here to trap you. But transcendence isn't set aloud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't burst through the ceiling with trumpets. It begins when you walk into a moment and feel everything inside you pause. Not out of fear, but out of knowing. You recognize the setup. You remember the outcome. You hold both in your hands and make a different choice. A slower breath. A deeper truth. A kinder word. It cracks. It flinches. And in that moment, the pattern hesitates. Time still stares, but now it sits surprised. You stir the author who rewrites. Because you're no longer the character who repeats. Not all at once. And in that rewrite, you begin to break the spell. Not forever. But enough. Enough to taste freedom. Enough to soften the echo. Enough to walk away from the mirror. And when you do, time keeps watching. Not in judgment, but in awe. Because you saw the pattern. You stared back. You named it. And maybe that's all time ever wanted. Not your perfection, just your presence, not your pain. Because time repeats not to trap you, but to reveal you. And now that you've been revealed, what will you do next? You've been searching for the way out, climbing ladders of logic, tracing every hallway in your mind, trying to find the exit from the loop, digging tunnels through memory. But what if there is no exit? What if there never was? Not because you're trapped, but because you never actually left. You were always here. Not just in the physical sense, not just in the present moment. You were always here, in the pattern, in the pulse of time that circles itself, in the memory that leaks backward, because the beginning wasn't set behind you. Why does everything lead me back to the beginning? In the question you asked 1,000 different ways. You've been walking in spirals, not lines. It sets beneath you. Every ending a disguised return. Every breakthrough a familiar arrival. You keep thinking you're evolving. Every new path, a shadow of one you forgot walking. When sometimes you're just orbiting. You add layers. You switch scenery. But the essence of the experience, the emotion, the lesson, the pattern, remains. You rewrite the plot. Because you were always here. Even when you thought you escaped. Even when you claimed you changed. Even when you stood on the mountaintop and declared yourself free. Because freedom isn't about distance. Time smiled. Gently. It's about realization. The loop isn't broken by running. And now, you've recognized it. It's broken by recognition. You've seen the way your fears wear different masks, but whisper the same lines. You've noticed how your loneliness shifts shape, but lands in the same hollow part of you. You've caught yourself mid-thought, mid-action, mid-choice, and paused. And in that noticing, something shifted. Paused long enough to notice. Because the loop isn't what holds you. It sits recursive. Reminds you that consciousness isn't a straight line. It sets what reminds you. Layered. Reflective. You stir not living a timeline. You stir living a spiral staircase. And every time you ascend, you see the same walls from a higher angle. They look familiar, because they are. But now, you understand them. Because you were always here. Just not always aware. The loop never hid you from yourself. It waited for you to see through it. Not as punishment, but as a mirror. And now, you receiving it. A pattern is just a message repeated until it's received. It sits pulling you inward, deeper, into the question. You're beginning to understand that time isn't pushing you forward. Until now. Deeper into the you that watched all versions of yourself repeat and stayed silent. Because now, you stir listening. You stir seeing the ways your choices echo. The way your healing has to pass through the same territory that wounded you. The way your pain follows the same route, unless it's acknowledged. You keep returning to the same emotional landscapes. Not because you're cursed, but because there's something sacred buried there. Something only the loop could teach you. You are the awareness watching it. That you are not your reaction. You are the space it passes through. You are not the loop. You are not your fear. You are the witness of the loop. And once you see that, everything changes. Not on the outside. The outside still spins its gears. But on the inside, you stir no longer fooled. You feel the urge to repeat, and you breathe instead. You hear the script begin again, and you rewrite the line. You wake up in the middle of the loop, and you stay awake. But with cycles, this is how time teaches. Not with clocks or calendars. With the same desire wrapped in new obsessions. With the same argument, wrapped in different voices. With the same regret, wrapped in new hope. As it is. And eventually, you learn to stop unwrapping. You just hold it. Because you were always here. Recognizing the core. And this is where you were always meant to arrive. Not a perfect version of yourself. Not a new destination. Just the moment you realize. You don't need to escape. You need to see. And you do now. But you do. Maybe not all the time. Maybe not perfectly. You see the stillness underneath the spiral. You sense the quiet you who has always been watching, patiently, lovingly, waiting for you to catch up. You feel the observer underneath the habit. Right where you began. And here you are. But this time, the loop bows. Because now, You know. It sits not trying to trick you anymore. It sits fulfilled its purpose. To pattern. You know that every moment you lived has pointed you back to this. To presence. To peace. But because it no longer owns you, not because the loop is gone, you can still walk the circle. You speak new words into old spaces. But you do it with open eyes. You meet the echo, and you nod, not in fear, but in understanding. And now that you remember, you were always here. You don't have to run. In the center, you can stay. In the silence, the loop continues. In the knowing, not as a prisoner, but so do you. But as the pattern sits final witness, you completed everything. You broken nothing. And so, here you are again. Not at the end of the journey, but at the part of the loop where it feels like you've arrived. The scenery looks familiar. The questions still hum beneath your breath. The silence still echoes back your name. But something is different. Not the world. Not the facts. Not even the feelings. What sits changed is you. Or rather, your awareness of you. You used to chase the exit, the door that would lead you out of this recursive world. You used to measure progress by distance, and healing by forgetting. But the loop never asked you to forget. It asked you to remember. Remember the shape of your thoughts, the rhythm of your fears, the moments that keep repeating, not because they sit broken, but because they sit sacred. A loop isn't set punishment. It's persistence. It's the universe gently tapping on the same window, until you finally look through it. And now, you have. You've looked long enough to see the reflection behind the repetition, to notice the watcher inside the watched, to meet yourself in the center of the pattern, not as a victim of time, but as its witness. What happens next? Maybe the loop continues. Maybe it tightens. Maybe it softens. Or maybe, just maybe, you walk the same circle, but with your eyes open. You don't resist the repetition. You recognize it. You name it. You breathe into it. You stop asking when it will end, and start asking what it sits trying to show you. And in that moment, you find something that was never missing, only waiting, stillness. Not the stillness of silence, but the stillness of knowing that wherever you are in the loop, you not lost. You fear home, because the pattern didn't trap you. It held you, until you could hold yourself. So now, sleep. Let the spiral cradle you, not carry you away. Let the rhythm lull you, not repeat you into oblivion. Let the pattern be what it was always meant to be, not a prison, but a poem. One you were born into, one you are still writing, one you now understand. And as your breath slows, and your thoughts fold inward, remember, you were never going in circles. You were being shown the shape of your own soul, and it sets beautiful. Good night, loop walker. You earned your rest. The pattern will wait for you, until you're ready to notice it again.